What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty, and welcome to another amazing video. You can follow me on Patreon for exclusive stories. 1F. Chapter 1 Time Travel. Advertise here. Chapter 1. Time Travel. The sun is scorching. America, a farm outside New York City. In the house on the farm, the living room is full of wine bottles. The food on the table has become moldy due to time and even smells bad. On the sofa in the center of the living room lies a young Asian man with black hair and cold eyes. Shaved, clean facial lines, high nose bridge, because the eyes are closed, it is easy to see the thick and long eyelashes, coupled with the thin and red lips, the whole person looks very cool and handsome. Especially because he is Asian, his hair is black, and his temperament is very cold. Suck. Carl took a deep breath and opened his eyes suddenly. After smelling the surrounding smell, he immediately covered his mouth. The food in front of him and the surrounding wine bottles were moldy due to too long time. That smell is not good. Where is this? I'm not. Then Carl began to recall his recent memories. He only remembered that he was in love with a girl, but he didn't dare to express his feelings. He also knew that there was no result between the two. After knowing that the other girl had a boyfriend, he was drinking alone by the lake, and that it was still 2 or 3 in the middle of the night, and he had no memory after that. Carl sat on the sofa and calmed down for a while, regardless of the stench around him, thinking that he had read a lot of online novels before, and now this situation seemed to be the legendary time travel, or soul travel, and looked at the surroundings, it seemed that this guy had been dead for a few days, and even the food on the table was moldy. After taking a deep breath, Carl stood up and walked towards the door. Click. After opening the door and looking at the sunshine outside, he suddenly felt that time travel might not be a bad thing, because in the original world, he was an orphan, especially an orphan without money, and the girl he admired had an upper middle class family background. He struggled all his life and could hardly buy a house in the city where her home was located. Even though he knew there was no result, he was still stuck in it and couldn't extricate himself. Now that he has traveled to another world, all these things can be dispersed by the wind. Many times he knows that he is just touching himself. Now he can let go completely and even start a new life. Carl suddenly felt a wave of memories pouring into his mind, and the mental fluctuations caused made Carl miserable. After all, the brain is the most vulnerable part of the human body. At this moment, Carl felt that his head was about to explode, and he was rolling on the ground holding his head. It was too painful, and it was still an existence that he could not control until 5 minutes later. After this memory was received by Carl's brain, Carl felt much better. Then he could now check the memory that had just entered his mind, and Carl was lying on the ground breathing heavily. At this moment, he only had one thought: to live. Very nice. After resting for a while, Carl slowly stood up and walked to the sofa. Then he started to check the memory. When he sat on the sofa, he found that the memory just now actually had the name Tony Stark in it, and even found that he got the name of Steve Rogers, that is, Captain America, and even Osborn Enterprises and Stark Enterprises, and even some of Mutants' remarks, and also learned the source of this memory. It was the original memory of the unlucky guy whose soul he had passed through. Maybe because he had been dead for a few days, the memory he received from Carl was incomplete, but he knew the name of this body, Carl Augustin Jong. At the same time, I also learned why the original person died. To put it bluntly, he died of drinking. Because the real owner of this farm died, and then he drank alone at home. He drank the entire living room, nearly 20 or 30 boxes of wine, and even a lot of American Golden Ale, which had an alcohol content of up to 95%. It would be difficult for him to drink this way without dying. The person who died was Carl's adoptive father. Because the memory he received was incomplete and he didn't know how he was adopted, he knew that he was the adopted son of the owner of the farm, and the two had a very good relationship, and his adoptive father, Jack Ogeson, died in a car accident 7 days ago. He was only in his 50s. After Carl held his adoptive father's funeral, he drank alone at home. It might have been alcohol poisoning or sudden death. No matter what the reason, he did die on his own. After closing his eyes and being silent for a while, Carl rubbed his head and found his original cell phone, because he had to confirm the names and pictures that appeared in his memory. After all, Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, Osborn Corporation, Mutant, but they are all characters from Marvel movies in their previous lives. If we really traveled to the Marvel world. Then Carl found his original cell phone, charged it and turned it on, and searched for a while in the phone. His eyes became dull, because everything in his memory just now was true, and he had really traveled to the Marvel world. This extremely dangerous world is even a composite world in some movies. Isn't this a world where supervillains are running around and superheroes are chasing each other? There is even a mad titan who wants to wipe out half of all living things in the universe, and there is even a mutant. But after receiving the memory of his original body, he knows that he is not a mutant. A little special ability. Carl showed a wry smile. Did he know that New York would be invaded by aliens soon, and as an ordinary person, he was simply waiting to die here? Carl cheered up, and after checking the time, he found that it was actually 2008, which is Iron the year man was born was also the year Marvel's chaos began. And now there is no Iron Man, which means that Tony Stark has not gone to the Middle East, been kidnapped or even escaped. Thinking of this, he is planning to buy a ticket and run away, and he is just an ordinary person and does not want to stay here for a few days. New York, which had been in trouble since the beginning of the month, immediately prepared to go to that big eastern country. You must know that he is an Asian. Even though he grew up in America, he is still an Asian. In addition, he was from the East in his previous life, so he naturally yearns for the East. Moreover, he remembers that when he was watching Marvel movies, the East was the place that happened the least. A country in disaster is not like America, because the joke in the previous life is not a lie. Free America, gun battles every day. Although Carl's English is no less good than his Chinese in his previous life because he has received the memories of his predecessor, for the sake of his life, it is better to run away. He is not sure whether he will be able to time travel if he dies again, because this time travel is quite magical. Yes, he didn't even know how he traveled through time. Did he drink too much and fall into the lake? Carl shook his head and continued to pack his things. These things were all from his previous life, but now that Carl had traveled through time, they naturally belonged to Carl. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded in Carl's ear. System activation. 40%, 60%, 100%. Activation completed. Close black lens bracket. Chapter 2 System activation. Advertise here. Chapter 2. System activation. Carl's body trembled when he heard the voice, and his whole body froze in place. If he heard it correctly just now, that voice was the system. Having read a lot of online articles, he naturally understood that it was Goldfinger. He could even gain powerful power. Carl couldn't help but think that maybe he wouldn't have to leave America. Open black lens bracket ding. The system has been activated and you now have a chance to sign in. After signing in, you can obtain items, props, characters, creatures, and other things from all over the world. The characters who sign in will be loyal to the host forever. Close black lens bracket. The number of items obtained by signing in is random, and the sign-in time is random. Are you signing in now? Close black lens bracket. Yes, sign in now. Carl said immediately after hearing the system's explanation, and his tone was very exciting, because this is the system, and now it is completely Carl's life-saving straw. You must know that there are dangerous marvels everywhere, and he has nothing. He felt so safe that he might even be robbed by BLCKMN while walking on the street. If the gun went off, he would probably be taken away directly. Not to mention that Carl knew about the Sorcerer Supreme, Ancient One in Camtage on Earth. That was the big guy holding the time gem. She probably couldn't tell where she was watching him, not to mention that she had been observing the Earth all the time. To defend against invasions from all major dimensions, Carl is not sure whether Ancient One has discovered his own appearance. He must have appeared in the Marvel world because of the system. Which one is more powerful than the system and Ancient One? It must be the system. Open black lens bracket ding. Sign in successfully. Congratulations on getting Frozen Fruit X1, Nia Mask X1, Woodcutter's Fountain X3. Close black lens bracket. Frozen Fruit. A unique fruit from the world of One Piece. It is a natural frozen fruit. After eating it, you can gain the ability to control ice and even elementalize yourself. However, you will be cursed by the sea and will not be able to swim or touch. The sea water will lose its ability and become weak. Nia Mask. This unique mask from The Adventures of Jackie Chan can summon humanoid ninja soldiers from the darkness, and each ninja soldier's combat power is equivalent to that of a special forces soldier. Because the system has modified its rules, you can summon ninjas without wearing them. They will not be demonized by the mask, but will slowly strengthen the host body. If you collect 10 masks, you can get the entire Shadow Kingdom. Woodcutter's Spring. From the world of Doraemon, as long as you throw something into the water of Woodcutter's Spring, the Woodcutter Goddess will emerge from the water in front of you. If you can be truthful, tell me what you are leaving behind, and she will give you something better. Close black lens bracket. Hiss. These are all good things. Frozen Fruit, Niga Mask, Woodcutter's Fountain. Now we finally have a foundation to establish ourselves in the Marvel world. The frozen fruit is the fruit of Aokiji in One Piece, but if you eat it now, you will still be cursed by the sea. It seems that you can only waste the Woodcutter's Fountain once. Carl looked at the 3 items in front of him and muttered to himself. He has decided to put the frozen fruit into the Woodcutter's Fountain to see if the curse can be removed. Then Carl placed a small swimming circle on the ground, threw the frozen fruit in, and put the Nia mask on his face. After all, the Woodcutter's Fountain must have its own merits. How could the Woodcutter Goddess do it? It is so easy to give you better items. Carl is not a fool. Although he has not watched Doraemon very much, it is definitely not that easy to answer, so he put on the Niga mask just in case. After all, he is also a member of the Shadow Kingdom 10, one of the great masks. Then the Woodcutter's Spring flashed with a burst of colorful light, and a beautiful goddess wearing a straw hat appeared in the spring, and then slowly said to Carl. Is it this imperfect frozen fruit you are throwing away, or this perfect frozen fruit? As the Woodcutter Goddess spoke, Carl secretly thought that it was true, because Carl felt that her words were full of temptation, making Carl keep looking at the perfect frozen fruit. If the Nia mask hadn't begun to strengthen Carl's body, and the reason for wearing it on the face is probably that Carl has already said that the perfect fruit was lost. What I lost was that imperfect fruit. Carl suppressed his desire and answered the woodcutter goddess. Perhaps because of his increased mental power due to time travel and the contribution of the Nia mask, Carl gave the correct answer. After hearing this, the woodcutter goddess replied happily. Congratulations, you got the answer right. Then I'll give you this perfect frozen fruit. Then the perfect frozen fruit appeared in Carl's hand, and the woodcutter goddess dived into the spring and disappeared. The woodcutter's spring bloomed again, and then disappeared, leaving only the first slap file-size swimming ring in place. Carl didn't care about the swimming ring, but looked at the frozen fruit in his hand. Frozen fruit. A unique fruit from the world of One Piece. It is a natural frozen fruit. After eating it, you can gain the ability to control ice, and you can elementalize your body. After passing through the woodcutter's spring, there will no longer be the curse of the sea. Close black lens bracket. Carl smiled slightly after seeing the system's annotation, and then took a bite. Click. As the fruit pulp entered his mouth, it was not as unpalatable as Carl's impression, but it was very delicious and especially sweet. Then Carl finished the frozen fruit in several big mouthfuls, and then stood there and felt the ability in his body. Then he gently raised his hand, and the floor, walls, wine bottles, and sofa in the room began to freeze. And the speed was very fast. Carl dispersed the ability, and then used elementalization. He turned into an Iceman, which also meant that he would be immune to physical attacks. There is no armed domineering in the Marvel world. Carl was not afraid at all. Being attacked, although there are many people in this world who can attack him, there are only a few on the Earth right now. Ancient One, are Charles, Dark Phoenix, Wanda. But that is also the future, and Carl is a little wary of Charles's mind control. After all, if his memory is seen by Charles, there will probably be big trouble. Carl thought about it and asked the system. System, is there any way to protect my memory from being invaded? The host does not have to worry, there is a system in place, and no one can invade the host's mind. Close black lens bracket. I can rest assured that. Carl was relieved when he heard the system's words, because Charles's ability was so incredible. With the addition of a brainwave enhancer, he could even destroy the entire human civilization instantly, but he wouldn't, and Carl also believed that Ancient One wouldn't just see it that way. Well, if human civilization is doomed, then what is the use of protecting the Earth? Now that Ancient One has not come to him, he is happy and at ease. What's more, talking to such a big boss will be very stressful. Maybe he will shake something out accidentally. If she regards herself as an intruder from the otherworld, it wouldn't be fun if he was locked up in the mirror space. Then Carl used the Niga mask to summon the Shadow Ninja from the darkness. The whole house was full of shadow ninjas. The black ninja uniform and the scarlet eyes looked very evil, but Carl didn't care at all. Try after checking my own limit, I could barely summon 1,000 shadow ninjas, but it was because my physique was too poor that I couldn't bear so much dark energy. After all, this place was different from the original world of Jackie Chan's adventures. Chapter 3 Looting the Gang. Advertise here. Chapter 3. Looting the Gang. Carl summoned 100 shadow ninjas and asked them to clean up the house and clear out a series of garbage such as wine bottles, because now he has ability and does not need to leave America, even though this is Marvel. Although there is danger, opportunities also exist. Although the Nia mask is slowly strengthening his physique, Carl feels that it is not enough, so he plans to plan some genetic strengthening of himself, and then walks into the bathroom. Entering the bathroom, he took off his clothes, turned on the shower, and looked at himself in the mirror with a strange face. Although he was much more handsome than his previous life, it also made him full of emotions, not to mention that he was just a man running for a living before. Ordinary people come to Marvel in the blink of an eye and have systems and special abilities. After feeling the energy of the black shadow mask and continuing to strengthen his body, he found that the major muscles of his body began to slowly emerge, and a series of muscles such as his abdominal muscles began to show lines. The corners of Carl's mouth rose slightly, not to mention who can refuse. As for his perfect body, his muscles at the moment are not all bulging, but just the right amount of muscles. They don't give people the feeling of exploding, but have a different kind of beauty. After Carl came out of the bathroom, the black shadow ninja had already cleaned up the living room and other rooms. Carl looked at the extremely clean living room and smiled with satisfaction. The black shadow ninja could perform some simple commands and tasks. Carl remembered that he had watched Jackie Chan before. In Adventures, Xiao Yu once controlled the shadow ninja to do a series of things such as housework. After looking at it with satisfaction for a while, he returned to the original person's room and sorted out all the original person's money. Then Carl found that he seemed to have no money. The original person used his last. All the US dollars were spent on wine, and now I only have 100 US dollars left. Carl couldn't help but feel speechless. This guy really planned to drink himself to death, but that's right. After all, Americans, everyone has huge loans, various student loans, and even many people who have graduated with PhD. After repaying the loan, Carl remembered that an American president in his previous life had only paid off the loan 3 years before taking office. Carl could not help but sigh at America's capital power, but fortunately he did not have a loan to repay. Because this girl didn't go to college at all. After graduating from high school, she stayed at home to help her adoptive father manage the farm. Carl looked at the few bills in his hand that totaled only $100 and couldn't help but have a headache. But Carl suddenly had an idea and thought of an idea. Method. I can go find the gang. This is Marvel. I am not a flower farmer in my previous life. I am no longer an ordinary person. It seems that I don't need to care about the laws of this world. After all, the source of the gang's money is not clean. Take it and take it. Just do whatever you want. Carl took out his original clothes from the wardrobe and put on a white shirt and black suit pants, and then put on a pair of leather shoes. This is already the most formal outfit in Carl's wardrobe, otherwise how trendy can you expect a farmer's adopted son to be? Carl walked out of the room slowly, with his black hair combed back, his blue eyes piercing, his handsome face, and his height of nearly 190 centimeters, perhaps because of the black shadow mask and frozen fruit. Carl's current temperament is sharp and mysterious. He did not put the black shadow mask on his face, but placed it in the system space, which is equivalent to a storage space, and everything except living things can be put in it. Carl walked slowly out of the living room, and the shadow ninja from before also emerged from the darkness and followed Carl. Click. Take me into the world of shadows and go to New York, that is, keep walking in this direction until there is a huge city. Carl turned around and said to the shadow ninja behind him, and pointed forward, because the shadow ninja didn't know what New York was. The shadow ninjas behind Carl nodded in unison after hearing this. The two shadow ninjas walked behind Carl, each stretched out a hand to put on both shoulders of Carl, and then led Carl into the shadows world. Although he can also enter the world of shadow, this is the first time he has entered. This world of shadow is not his now. He doesn't know what is in it. To be on the safe side, he should let the shadow ninja take him into it. Well, Carl generally remains vigilant about uncertainties and unknown things, or takes prudent action. After the black shadow ninja took Carl into the world of shadows, as expected, there were many dark creatures inside, and the auras they exuded were very terrifying. It even followed Carl and others. Perhaps because of the black shadow ninja, it just followed and did not attack. Carl couldn't help but feel lucky that he made the right decision to let the shadow ninja take him in. If he had entered alone, he would have been attacked. Before Carl could think about it, the shadow ninja took Carl out of the shadow world. Then Carl and the two shadow ninjas appeared in an alley in New York City. After Carl let the two shadow ninjas enter his shadow, walking outside, I found that I was actually in Manhattan, and Carl was going to Creighton, which also has a name, Hell's Kitchen. It is a small area under Manhattan, not far from Carl's current location. After Carl hailed a taxi, he went to Hell's Kitchen. Because the distance was not far, Carl appeared in Hell 20 minutes later. Kitchen Street. Carl walked slowly into a dark alley, and then a large scarlet light appeared in the alley. Carl summoned 500 shadow ninjas, and then ordered them to take away all the cash from the gangs in the area. All the shadow ninjas in the alley after nodding, he disappeared, and Carl himself asked two shadow ninjas to take him into the shadow world. He didn't want to be noticed, not to mention that there were a lot of black technologies in the Marvel world, and maybe there was something that could realizing that it was the shadow ninja he had summoned. 20 minutes after Carl entered the world of shadow, the shadow ninjas came back one after another, and they all held black boxes in their hands. After Carl opened one of the boxes, he found that they were all filled with US dollars, and these boxes had enough, there were more than 200, and the others were holding a pile of US dollars in their hands. Carl couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth when he saw so much money. In his previous life, he didn't even have a deposit of more than 50,000, and every black box here contains about $1 million, and there are more than 200 boxes here, and there are some scattered US dollars. Carl looked at the black shadow ninjas who came back and found that there were not 500 of them. They were probably killed after they were discovered, because the black shadow ninjas were not really immune to firearms. At most, they could only withstand a few hits or use katana to knock the bullets away. Forget it, Carl didn't care that much. So what if they were discovered? They didn't know it was Carl who did it. Even if they found out, Carl wasn't afraid. They could run away if they couldn't beat him. Not to mention that there is a mutant in this world. Carl doesn't believe there is such a thing among gangsters. His current strength is not very strong, so he doesn't plan to fight with others. His frozen fruit has not been developed yet, and even his physique is not strong enough. Now at most, they can only reach the level of a national level athlete, not even the level of Captain America. Chapter 4 Attention. Advertise here. Chapter 4. Attention. Carl asked the black shadow ninja to take him home, and put all the US dollars into his system space. After a while, he returned to his farm in the suburbs of New York, but what Carl didn't know was this. A large part of the money that Sombra stole in Hell's Kitchen was Wilson Grant Fisk's money, and it was all taken from his vault. Even the lost Sombra was outside his vault. And he also has another name, called Jin Bin. He is the boss of the entire Hell's Kitchen gang, and every gangster is very afraid of Kingpin, but they can only surrender and pay monthly. Even the entire gang in New York has something to do with him. Kingpin was sitting on the sofa in his office, looking at the vault not far away with an ugly expression. Although this amount of money was not worth mentioning to him, there was actually someone there. Qian entered the Fisk building openly and even blatantly stole his money. This was a slap in the face. Boss, the loss is about 150 million US dollars, and we are not the only ones who were stolen from Hell's Kitchen. They were only stealing for money, not for us. Bullseye walked up to Kingpin and explained nervously. I don't care who he is, find him for me, and I will let him know that my money is not that easy to get. Once you find it, let Mutant take action directly. Kingpin said to Bullseye in a deep voice, even revealing in his tone with murderous intent. Yes, boss. Bullseye lowered his head and replied before leaving. After Bullseye walked out of the office, he found that all the clothes on his back were soaked with sweat. Because of Kingpin's huge body, he seemed fat, but 98% of his body was made of muscles, and he had trained them by himself, let alone him. He had to carry out various fighting battles and training every day. Faced with Kingpin's momentum, Bullseye couldn't help but shudder in his heart. Although the movie assumes that Captain America is the pinnacle of human physical fitness, the real thing may not be Captain America, but Kingpin. What's more, Captain America has the protagonist's halo and vibranium shield to be 50-50 equal to anyone, but his power is not particularly powerful, and Kingpin is 98% muscle. I don't know who is stronger between the two, but when it comes to physical fitness, there is no doubt that Kingpin and Captain America are just taking drugs no matter what. And Kingpin was trained through hard work. As Bullseye spread Kingpin's order, the entire Hell's Kitchen and even the New York gang began to look for suspicious persons, let alone those who could enter and exit the Fisk building wantonly. How could they be ordinary people? But because of this, many mutant and ordinary people living in Hell's Kitchen are scrutinized and abused by gangsters. After all, gangsters won't just tell you to check. Many gangsters break into houses, rob, and rape them in the name of checking. And Carl didn't know that Kingpin was looking for him, but he initially planned to rob the gangsters knew they would be hunted by Kingpin, and he didn't panic at all, not worried at all that they would find him. After Carl returned to his home, he sprinkled a lot of US dollars on the bed, and then lay down on it. He had wanted to do this in his previous life, but conditions did not allow it. It was different now. After rolling on the bed a few times, Carl sat up and thought about how to improve his strength. Although he has the ability of frozen fruit, he is almost a novice when it comes to fighting and knows nothing. When Carl was distressed, he suddenly thought that his shadow ninja was not very powerful in melee combat, but only special forces. His strength must be stronger than his. Then Carl summoned 2 shadow ninjas and said to them, "Don't use weapons, you two have a fight." The 2 shadow ninjas nodded and then began to attack each other. Their moves hit the vital points. Various moves that could only be seen in movies were easily used by them, and even more perfect. Carl watched carefully from the side. Well, although he may not be able to use close combat much in the future, he still needs to be able to use it a little bit. Although he doesn't have to be proficient, it's enough as long as he can use it. In the next few days, Carl was learning melee combat with the Black Shadow Ninja, and he learned well. Because the dark energy was strengthening his body, his various statistics continued to increase, and he even did not use ice ability. When sparring with the Black Shadow Ninja, although he is usually the one who gets beaten, his melee ability has also been significantly improved, at least not like before. Without using the freezing ability, how many times can he fight? Ordinary people can still do it. Moreover, Carl's physique has improved a lot these days, and he can now use the freezing ability continuously. Carl's temperament has also become more sharp and mysterious, and he will be surrounded by cold air. This is not Carl's fault, but is naturally released in the body, perhaps because of the perfectly frozen fruit. Carl has also spent a lot of money these days. He bought the motorcycle that he had been dreaming about in his previous life. It was a top-of-the-line motorcycle. With the addition of a helmet, this car cost millions of dollars. The body of the car is made of black with some white parts all over it. The lines make this motorcycle look very high level. Coupled with the metallic texture, it's hard not to make Carl's heart flutter. After these days of exercise, Carl decided to go out for a lap. Then he put on his helmet and got on the motorcycle. He turned the accelerator and sped towards New York City. What he didn't know was that because he was holding a large amount of cash, the purchase of a motorcycle attracted Kingpin's attention. Chapter 5 Meeting Aunt May by Chance. Advertise here. Chapter 5. Meeting Aunt May by Chance. Carl was racing all the way on the road, and almost turned the accelerator to the bottom. The motorcycle roared towards the city. With Carl's current physical fitness and strength, even if an accident happened, nothing would happen to him, so he turned the throttle of the motorcycle unscrupulously. The speed did not slow down until he got close to the city. Just now his speed reached nearly 280 yards. After experiencing the speed and passion, Carl drove his motorcycle to a restaurant. This was a Chinese restaurant that served Chinese food. Carl discovered it accidentally. After feeling good about it, he would come here to eat occasionally. Fisk Building Kingpin Office. Boss, we found a suspicious target in a motorcycle shop in Manhattan. He bought a motorcycle with $1 million in cash, and the batch of cash he used was similar to the serial number of our stolen cash. He is a Chinese named Carl Augustin Zhang. His family is on a farm outside New York, and his adoptive father died in a car accident not long ago. He has no background, but I don't know what his ability is. Do you think? A blond man wearing gold-rimmed glasses and a suit reported to Jin Binwei, who was sitting in an office chair. He was Jin Bin's financial steward, Jesk Cleese. Bullseye, go see his strength and bring a few mutants. Kingpin glanced at Bullseye standing next to him and said. Yes, boss, there's no need for mutant. I can take care of him this time. Bullseye said to Kingpin, and then left the office alone. Kingpin didn't say much after hearing this. After all, he didn't need to finish it. Came back. Because before, the Black Shadow Ninja stole a large part of Kingpin's vault in front of Bullseye, but he only killed some of them, which made Bullseye very unhappy. In addition, because he didn't leave any enemies behind, Kingpin had already killed him. He was a little disappointed, so he planned to take him down alone and bring him to Kingpin. Bullseye is still confident in his own strength. Whether it is close combat or long-range combat, he is absolutely sure. After all, according to the data, Carl is just a person with special abilities. Without life and death struggle and systematic training, he cannot succeed. What a great weapon, until whatever the Bullseye throws will definitely hit the target, it will almost always hit the target. And it is so powerful that he can even kill someone 30 meters away with a toothpick. It is very easy for him to take down a person who has no strength and no skills. After all, most of the mutants under Kingpin were subdued by him, and he believes that this Carl will be no exception. On Carl's side, he had just finished dinner and was riding his motorcycle slowly in the city. He had no idea that the crisis was coming, until Carl suddenly saw a familiar figure beside a park. Carl stopped the car and thought for a moment. Yes, looking at the charming young woman not far away with a 5 or 6-year-old boy, Carl became more and more familiar with her. Isn't she May Parker? That's Spider-Man's Aunt May. In that case, the one next to her is little Spider-Man. Carl looked through the helmet at the girl who was about 5 or 6 years old. Peter Benjamin Parker. Carl vaguely remembered that he had various abilities after being bitten by a spider from Osborn Industries. According to the plot, if Peter has followed Aunt May now, it means that his parents are dead, which means that the spider serum has been researched, but only the blood of the Parker family can be injected with the serum to obtain various abilities. Carl couldn't help but be speechless at Richard Parker and his wife. They used Osborn Industrial's laboratory, funds, resources, and were even classmates with Norman Osborn. He also knew that this was used to cure the Osborn family's genetic disease, but the result was. He ran away with the key formula, and even locked the formula into his own genetic code, just because Osborn Industries wanted to create biological weapons. He didn't even care about the consequences of their escape. He even gave his son to Aunt May and them without thinking about whether it would implicate them. And after he took other people's funds, resources, and researched it, he just did it for his own benefit. Heroism ran away with the formula, why didn't he just blow up the Stark Company? After all, Stark is the leader of the arms company, and Carl has no good impressions of them. In the plot, Richard Parker seems to have given the key formula to Peter Parker, but he didn't know it and put it in a black briefcase. Carl was wondering whether he should follow them and find the black briefcase. After all, spider serum is a good thing, especially spider telepathy. As for the locked genetic code, Marvel is a much better biologist than Richard Parker. As long as he has the information, he will always find a way to solve it. Brush. Boom. A metal flying darts-like object was shot at Carl from behind. When it was about to hit Carl, it was blocked by the Black Shadow Ninja in Carl's shadow, and the flying darts were directly knocked away. Carl also reacted at this moment. Someone attacked him. He immediately jumped out of the car and jumped behind a big tree. Thinking back to the scene just now, Carl couldn't help but feel trembling. If he hadn't let 2 Black Shadow Ninjas enter his shadow before, he would probably have been hit this time. He took off his helmet, took a deep breath, and immediately turned on elementalization. Instead, he walked directly out of the bunker and walked in the direction where the flying darts were shot. Even in some dark places around him, pairs of scarlet eyes kept flashing, and he rushed to that place. Chapter 6 Bullseye's Attack. Advertise here. Chapter 6 Bullseye's Attack. Carl walked slowly in that direction with a gloomy face, and the Black Shadow Ninja was already fighting with the other party. As Carl walked, he thought about who it could be. Carl looked at the motorcycle behind him and understood instantly, because he could and would take a not many people spend millions of dollars in cash to buy motorcycles, let alone the son of a farmer. How could he have so much money? Thinking of this, Carl couldn't help but sigh that he was still too young. If you transfer money from the bank, you won't be discovered at all, but it seems that you will be noticed if you take a large amount of cash to save money. Carl couldn't help but smile bitterly, and then quickened his pace, and soon he came to the place where the flying darts were shot. A dozen shadow ninjas were fighting a man with a target tattoo on his forehead. Carl recognized the man, Bullseye. He was the #1 killer under Kingpin. He didn't expect it to be him. While Carl was thinking about it, Bullseye killed several more shadow ninjas. Carl raised his eyebrows, not to mention that the strength of the shadow ninjas was not weak. I didn't expect that the flying darts thrown by Bullseye could directly kill the Black Shadow Ninja. Boom. Brush. As Bullseye continued to throw the flying darts in his hand, all the shadow ninjas that hit were eliminated. Carl saw the blue light flashing in his eyes. Carl used ability to create ice picks and controlled them to move at extremely fast speeds. Bullseye shot. Ding 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 ding. Although Bullseye's skills are not bad, he needs to be distracted while fighting the shadow ninja and avoiding the ice picks. However, he managed to avoid most of the ice picks. 2 ice picks still pierced Bullseye's body, and the remaining shadows the ninja immediately put katana on his neck and subdued him. Carl slowly walked towards Bullseye, who had been subdued by the black shadow ninja. Every time he took a step, ice lotus patterns bloomed under his feet, and the temperature around him increased rapidly. Decline. Even the surrounding walls were frozen. Carl walked up to Bullseye and said slowly. The Kingpin asked you to come, Bullseye. How? So what? You stole the boss's vault. Even if you kill me, someone else will come looking for you. Bullseye was surprised and wanted to ask Carl, and then he was silent for a while. Slowly said to Carl, although he didn't know how the other party knew his name, but now he failed, even if the other party let him go, Kingpin would not let him go. After saying this, Bullseye fell silent. Brush. Click. Bullseye took advantage of Carl looking behind him, shot a silver-white short needle out of his mouth, and only took out Carl's heart. He succeeded, but Carl still looked at him expressionlessly, and then in front of his he took out the silver-white short needle in front of him. After taking it out, Carl was fine at all, not even bleeding. In Bullseye's disbelieving eyes, he raised his hand and penetrated Bullseye's head with an ice pick, then turned around and walked out. The shadow ninja who was guarding Bullseye just now has also returned to the world of shadow. Carl just used elementalization. However, facing a character who licks blood all the time, the car may overturn if he is not careful. Carl always talking with elementalization and Bullseye on. Carl returned to the motorcycle and picked up the helmet not far away. He had to prepare well now, and it was not a good thing to be targeted by Kingpin. Although he was the one who stole the other party's money first, Carl thought he was not what a good person, and Jin Bin's money is not clean money. Carl stepped forward and sat on the motorcycle. He found that May Parker and Peter Parker were no longer in the park. Carl had decided to get the spider serum at this moment. After all, if there was spider telepathy, Bullseye's 2 sneak attacks just now would not be possible. Success. Carl can even hit the opponent immediately. Then Carl started driving to Queens. According to the address in the movie, Peter Parker's family lived at 177A Blake Street. Carl planned to wait for them to fall asleep and steal the formula without anyone noticing, and then Carl started to drive to Blake Street. Drive to 177A Street. Just when Carl was approaching Black Street, when he passed an alley, he suddenly heard. Let go of my aunt. Help, help, Peter. No, don't do this. I can give you money. After Carl heard Peter's name, he parked the car on the side of the road, took off his helmet and walked towards the alley. Although this incident had nothing to do with him, the still charming and beautiful Aunt May was still worth his while. Carl, although I have some thoughts about her, I just don't know if her husband is dead. It seems that her husband died due to an electrical work error in a company. I just don't know what the current Marvel world is like. Carl walked into the alley and saw several black men grabbing May Parker's arms, while Peter Parker bit a black man's hand with his teeth, and another black man punched and kicked Peter in order to get him to let go. When they saw Carl walking up, they yelled. Yellow-skinned monkey, get away. Don't come looking for death. Fake oil. Yellow-skinned monkey, get out. Seeing their dirty looks, Carl felt unhappy. He walked up to them and slapped the black man who was holding Aunt May's arm on the head. Boom. With one slap, the nearly 1.9 meter tall BLCKMN flew away and hit the wall directly in the direction of Carl's slap. When the other BLCKMN saw his companion being beaten, he took out a spring from his pocket. The knife rushed towards Carl. Hey, be careful, May exclaimed when she saw the man charging at the young man who just saved her with a knife. Boom. Carl looked at the BLCKMN who was rushing over, kicked him away, and fell on the BLCKMN who was slapped away. Seeing that Carl was fine, May immediately walked to Peter to check his injuries, and then found that Peter was just after suffering some skin injuries. He breathed a sigh of relief, then brought Peter to Carl and said. Thank you for saving us, thank you so much. If it weren't for your appearance, we might. Because she is a weak woman, and Peter is only a 5 or 6-year-old child. If no one saves her, the result will naturally be. It's okay. I heard someone calling for help, so I came over to see. Is this brave little boy okay? Carl said slowly after taking a look at Aunt May. He couldn't help but sigh. It's hard for such a beautiful woman to let people know. Not heart-pounding, but exuding a mature charm, coupled with her plump figure, even Carl can't help but feel his heart beat faster. Chapter 7 Obtaining the Formula. Advertise here. Chapter 7. Get the formula. It's okay, I just suffered some skin injuries. How about you go home with us? You can save us once anyway. We have to entertain you, and Peter also needs to apply some medicine. May looked at the black man in front of her. The young man with blue eyes said that for some reason, she always felt that this young man had a different feeling, and his temperament was a bit mysterious. This is inconvenient, it's quite late now. Carl looked at the sky and said slowly to Aunt May. It's okay, I'll give you a taste of the apple pie I made. Brother, just come with us. You were so handsome in those 2 moves just now. Can you teach me a lesson? Okay. Excuse me. Under May and Peter's kind invitation, Carl agreed. It just so happened that he originally wanted to go to their house, but the purpose and method were different. Carl also wanted to see the Marvel world. Peter, is your uncle still there? Because he said that sentence, the greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. Although Carl didn't take it seriously, it affected Peter's future life. Because Carl was riding a motorcycle, Peter's eyes lit up when he saw Carl's motorcycle, and he asked Carl if he could take him for a ride. Carl readily agreed. After all, Peter was still very cute when he was a child, and May could only she looked at them helplessly, but in the end she also got on Carl's motorcycle. Because Peter was relatively small, he could only sit on top of the motorcycle's fuel tank. Carl even put a helmet on Peter, while May sat behind Carl. Originally, her hand was supposed to hold the fuel tank, but because Peter sat on it, she could only hold Carl's waist, and when she put her hand on it, a trace of surprise flashed in her eyes, because she found that all the places she touched were muscles. Then she couldn't help but touch Carl's abdominal muscles. Carl was naturally aware of it, but he didn't stop him. Not to mention that May was a mature woman who still had charm. He expressed his willingness, and then started the motorcycle and drove in the direction Peter said. After the motorcycle started, an impact force hit May's body. The chest hit Carl's back hard. Carl felt the softness coming from his back, and couldn't help but think in his heart that he didn't expect Aunt May to be so rich. May hugged Carl's waist with a blushing face. For some reason, she leaned her head on Carl's broad and strong back. She felt so safe at this moment, and even what happened just now caused her to still feel I was a little scared, but now my heart has calmed down, as if I don't need to think about anything, it feels very comfortable and warm. Because this place is not far from Peter's home, it only takes 5 minutes to get there. Then May glanced at Carl's back with nostalgia, and slowly got off the motorcycle. Then Carl hugged Peter off, parked the motorcycle, and went with May. Peter entered their home together. After entering their home, I found that although it was not very big, it was very warm and exquisitely decorated, giving people a very comfortable feeling. Carl could only say that she was indeed Aunt May. Peter, come here first, I'll apply some ointment on you. May said to Peter with a stick of ointment, and then Peter walked over, and then May applied a little on Peter's now green areas, and then let Peter play by himself. Wait a minute, I'll make you my best apple pie, Aunt May said to Carl while tying her apron, and Carl looked at Aunt May, who was tying her apron with great interest at the moment. With the charm of a mature woman, with a plump figure and wearing an apron, she has a unique style. Okay, then I have to give it a try. By the way, isn't your husband at home? Carl said with a smile, and then asked the question in his heart. No, he has left because he is an electrician and because of an operation error, so. May replied to Carl in a somewhat depressed mood. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'm sorry for bringing up your sadness. Carl said to Aunt May with an apologetic look. No, it doesn't matter, just stay here, or you can go to the second floor to play games with Peter. I'll be there soon. May knew that Carl didn't mean it, so she didn't mind, and walked into the kitchen after saying that. What she didn't know was that Carl was intentional. At this moment, Carl's heart was naturally more joyful. In other words, Aunt May was single now. Doesn't it mean that he had the opportunity to own this beautiful woman who still had charm, although he uses force directly like a villain and possesses her ruthlessly, but Carl prefers to conquer from heart to body. After Carl walked into the bathroom, he summoned 2 shadow ninjas, and then asked them to go to Peter Parker's room and get the black briefcase under his bed. In Carl's memory, Peter seemed to have thrown the briefcase away before. Under the bed, although I don't know if it is, but I have to see it to find out. Then the 2 shadow ninjas disappeared into the darkness. Carl did not leave, but waited in the bathroom for a while. A minute later, 2 shadow ninjas appeared, one of them holding a black briefcase with a Carl opened it without paying attention to the dust. When he saw the words, "Spider Serum," on it, he understood that this was it. Then he took it into the system space and took the 2 black shadow ninjas into his shadow. Because of what happened with Bullseye before, Carl now has 100 black shadow ninjas on standby in his shadow at any time, and they will even automatically replace Carl resist the attack. After doing all this, Carl returned to the living room and sat on the sofa, drinking the drink that Aunt May had given him just now, and then waiting to get ready to try Aunt May's craftsmanship. 20 minutes later, Aunt May came to Carl with an apple pie and cut out a piece for Carl to try. After Carl took a bite, he felt pretty good and cleared the apple pie on the plate in 2 strokes. Aunt May saw Carl liked to eat what he made and showed a knowing smile. After all, no one would be unhappy when they see others enjoying their own food. This is the best apple pie I have ever eaten, thank you, May. Carl said to Aunt May with a smile. The reason why he knew May's name was because Peter said it when he was sitting on the motorcycle, and Carl he also told him his name. As long as you like it. Thank you so much today. If it weren't for you. May thanked Carl. It's okay. Next time you should try to take the main road, and try not to go out at night, because the security here is not very good. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Carl. You've thanked me many times. I think this apple pie is enough to express your gratitude. Okay. It's almost time and I should go. I'll give it to you. Carl walked out of the door and walked towards his motorcycle, while May followed Carl. After Carl got on the motorcycle, May hesitated because she felt a little empty after knowing that Carl was leaving. Maybe it's because Carl saved her, or maybe it's because of the sense of security she felt on the motorcycle, or maybe it's because Ben Parker has been away for too long. Lost again. Chapter 8 Mutant Attack. Advertise here. Chapter 8. Mutant Attack. Carl, can you leave your phone number with me, because Peter just said he would like to call you. May saw Carl put on his helmet and was about to leave. She didn't know where it came from. Courage said to Carl, and after finishing speaking, he lowered his head and did not dare to look at Carl. Carl glanced at May in surprise, not to mention he knew very well whether Peter had said this. Although Carl didn't show it on his face, he was already happy in his heart, because even without May's words, I will also get Aunt May's mobile phone number. Okay, please remember. After Carl finished speaking, he glanced at Aunt May meaningfully, and then left directly on his motorcycle. May stared at Carl's leaving figure in a daze. Thinking of her actions just now and Carl's meaningful look, she couldn't help but blush for herself. After all, Peter went back to the second floor to play games after applying the medicine. How could he have said this? Then, thinking of this, she also knew that she was exposed, and Carl did not refuse. May didn't know how to describe her feelings for Carl. She felt very at ease when she was with him. It was impossible to say it was love. After all, they had only met once, but they didn't like her. Maybe they just had a slight affection. What's more, since Ben left, she had to take care of Peter alone. Although there was some compensation after Ben's death, it was not enough to allow her to spend recklessly, not to mention that Peter still needed money for school and other places. So May is still under a lot of pressure. Now she just does some handmade needlework for others to earn money. She even has to pick Peter up after school. The sudden sense of security that Carl made her feel goes straight to the pit of her heart. Let her never forget it for a long time. Carl was now driving the motorcycle in the direction of his home, but he was in a very happy mood at the moment, which made him turn the throttle to the bottom. The motorcycle shot out a white figure on the road and disappeared at an extremely fast speed. When Carl got home, he felt something was wrong, because he remembered that he had clearly closed the door to the farm before, and there were wheel marks that did not belong to Carl's motorcycle around. After Carl stopped the car, hundreds of black figures appeared around him. Shadow Ninja, and quickly sneaked towards the house on the farm. An hour ago. Fisk building. Boom. Trash. Didn't I say he could handle it? He actually died in the hands of that brat. Call Mutant. All of them. Kingpin slapped the desk in front of him angrily, and the desk was directly destroyed. He clapped it in half, and then fiercely ordered the men next to him. Yes, boss. Jesk Clay next to him said respectfully to Jinpin and then left. He directly sent out all the mutants and went directly to Carl's farm, ready to wait and see. Although they didn't know the scene of the battle between Bullseye and Carl, there was no way that a dozen mutants couldn't defeat one mutant, no. They already regard Carl as a mutant with special abilities. There are now at least 12 mutants ambushed in Carl's farm, but most of them are mutants with relatively strong physical fitness, and very few have special abilities. Either they have a big tail, or their hands look like monsters. Most of them don't look like normal people. After all, almost all mutants who look like normal people and have special abilities are taken away by Charles, saying they want to save mutants. But there are many mutant laboratories in the world, and it is not even possible for him to bring all mutants into the Xavier Academy for Gifted Youth. Boom, 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 boom. As the Black Shadow Ninjas infiltrated, they soon started fighting with the mutants, and Carl also knew the locations of all the mutants. Although he had some guesses in his heart, no matter what, since they dared to come. Then Carl dares to kill, but what are the consequences? Whether it's Xavier Academy for Gifted Youngsters or the Kingpin, he can afford it. It's not easy for him to evaluate Charles. Right or wrong has nothing to do with him. Since mutants like them dare to come, they must die. More and more shadow ninjas emerged from the darkness and attacked the 12 mutants. Carl elementalized his body, aimed at a mutant and controlled the ice pick to shoot. Under Carl's anger, Carl began to lose energy. Using the ability of the frozen fruit, he directly tied the mutant into a quill, and even penetrated the opponent's body. After finishing this one, Carl continued to attack another mutant, killing one after another. They were not mutants with special abilities, and they could hardly escape the fate of being killed by Carl. They were all just physically mutated. Mutant, even Sombra Ninja can injure them, let alone Sombra Ninja's infinite resurrection, which will only consume Carl's physical strength. After killing all the mutants, Carl asked the Shadow Ninja to drag all their corpses into the Shadow World and feed them to the creatures in the Shadow World. Carl thought about it for a while and decided to kill him after he recovered. To the Fisk Tower. Now that they have found this place, it will be bad if Aunt May is implicated. They should solve the problem as soon as possible. Then they walked back to their house and sat on the sofa to think about who Carl wanted to pass on the formula of the spider serum. Crack it and create it. He is just a scumbag and knows nothing, let alone how to cultivate a super spider. If you ask him to steal it, it's almost the same. The names of several people flashed through his mind, but he still gave up. It was impossible to control these people without special means. Carl suddenly thought of the genes studied by Stark Industries, but they seemed to be too overbearing because of the side effects, and were sealed by the military. Okay. Thinking of this, Carl suddenly had an idea, because it was now 2008, which meant that Tony Stark would be kidnapped soon. If he rescued him, he could even let him perfect the super gene previously researched by Stark Industries. It's not impossible to give him one later. It seems that this super gene was sealed by Rose and injected into Blonsky later. Chapter 9 Killing the Gangsters. Advertise here. Chapter 9. Kill the Gangsters. After thinking of this, Carl made up his mind to make Tony Stark owe him a favor and ask Tony to create a super gene for him. After all, his physique is still too weak. Although he has elemental body protection, if he has no physical strength, isn't it just like the decoration, and the frozen fruit needs to be developed step by step. Now he has not exerted half of the power of the frozen fruit. You must know that the Aoki pheasant in one piece can freeze the sea. After resting for 30 minutes, Carl walked out of the house and walked towards his motorcycle. He stepped on the motorcycle, put on his helmet and drove towards New York City at high speed. He turned the accelerator to the bottom and the motorcycle made a deafening roar. After making a sound, he turned into a white shadow and rushed towards New York City. Although he could let the Shadow Ninja take him to the Shadow Kingdom, Carl just wanted to tell Kingpin, I am coming, are you ready? If you don't beat them painfully, they will probably keep causing trouble for you in the future. Fisk Building. Boss, all the mutants sent out have lost contact, and someone spotted a black and white motorcycle speeding towards New York City. It is initially concluded that it is Carl Augustin Zhang. Jesk Kress lowered his head and said Jin Bingwei, who was sitting on an office chair, reports. Then let the entire Hell's Kitchen gang move, and I will kill him if I want him. Kingpin said calmly to Jesk Kressing. Everyone who knew him understood that as long as Kingpin's tone became more and more serious, if he is calm, then he will be angrier at the moment. Yes, boss. Jesk Creston lowered his head and said to Kingpin before turning and leaving the office, and then ordered the major gangs to attack Carl. And he also knew that Kingpin was currently in rage state. He didn't want to offend his misfortune, as he might be strangled to death later, not to mention that this was how the last financial steward died. Then Jesk Cleese conveyed Kingpin's order to the major gang leaders, and then the entire Hell's Kitchen moved. This action also alerted the Manhattan Police Department, but they did not move out because now, even mobilizing police forces from surrounding areas is not enough to control and quell the entire Hell's Kitchen, but it is better to let them fight and kill more people. After all, no one in the Hell's Kitchen gang is kind. When Carl rode his motorcycle quickly into the city, he slowed down and drove towards the Creighton area. However, Carl felt something was wrong along the way. It was too quiet after entering Hell's Kitchen. How could Hell's Kitchen be so quiet? Carl looked around vigilantly, and released several shadow ninjas to explore the way. When the shadow ninjas sent back the information, they realized that Kingpin had asked the major gangs to prepare to snipe him. Even as soon as he enters the street in front, he will be beaten into pieces by hundreds of gang members holding various weapons. Carl sneered, then stepped off the motorcycle and put it into the system space. Shadow ninjas continued to appear behind him. After a while, nearly 500 shadow ninjas appeared behind Carl, and Carl stood in the middle, slowly walking towards the street in front. The shadow ninja behind him also followed Carl towards the front. Carl at this moment is more like a gangster than them. If Carl had a slicked back hair and gold-rimmed glasses, he would be a proper gangster and a gentle scum. Carl led the black shadow ninja towards the gang not far ahead, and he led the black shadow ninja behind him to form a huge momentum, directly impacting the gang members in Hell's Kitchen. Fire! I don't know who shouted, and then gang members of various colors began to shoot in the direction of Carl. Various weapons, pistols, rifles, submachine guns, and heavy weapons were not available. After all, if there was too much trouble, Kingpin himself would be in trouble. In the end, let alone the use of heavy weapons in New York, he will be held accountable by his backers immediately. If he wanted to be the underground overlord, it wouldn't just rely on his muscles. He would have been killed long ago. Bang bang bang. Carl calmly raised his right hand that was shining with blue light, and then a wall of ice suddenly formed in front of him, blocking all attacks. Carl turned back slightly, and all the shadow ninjas disappeared in place, and 3 seconds later, a scream came from the front. Ah, what is this? Fake oil. Ah, bang. Why can't I be beaten to death? 5 minutes later, all the gang members in front were killed by the black shadow ninja. Then Carl looked at the surveillance camera not far away and smiled. This picture happened to be the surveillance camera of Kingpin monitoring the battlefield. He also saw Carl's smile, as if while laughing at Jin Bin's incompetence, although he was already filled with anger, he couldn't help but be surprised by the opponent's strength. Even the opponent didn't even take action himself, and just relied on those ninjas to kill everyone. He now doubted whether those ninjas were ninjas from the Hand and the Society, but after he saw that those ninjas could emerge from the darkness, he rejected these ideas, because the ninjas from the Hand and the Society couldn't do this. Even if they could do it, how could he be sent here to steal the little money he had? Although he might not be richer than him, he wouldn't be that poor either. But the Kingpin thought wrong. The Hand and the Union were much richer than the Kingpin. After all, the 5 fingers were all figures who had lived for hundreds of years. How could there not be an underground gang boss who was rich? For Hanhehui, except for keel bones or things that increase lifespan, they are not interested in anything else. Even Jinpin is not in their eyes. In their eyes, Jinpin is just a stronger one. Just ordinary people. Then Carl walked towards the Fisk building, and he was surrounded by shadow ninjas. Any gang organization he encountered was slaughtered by the shadow ninjas. This scene also attracted the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D, and now they are still called Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. Director, you should probably take a look at this. Mary Jane Hill said to the one-eyed black man wearing a black leather jacket and pants next to her, and he is the current director of S.H.I.E.L.D, Nick Fury. At the same time, there's another name, Damn Fuck Man. Then Nick Fury took the tablet handed over by Mary Jane Hill and checked it. The video played on it was the scene of Carl leading the Black Shadow Ninja to massacre the gang members, and there was even a scene of Carl using the frozen fruit ability, and the scene where the Dark Ninja emerges from the darkness. Chapter 10 Kingpin, Die. Advertise here. Chapter 10. Kingpin, Death. Director, his name is Carl Augustin Zhang. He is an Asian. He was adopted by a farmer in the suburbs of New York when he was a child. He only has a high school education and never went to college. The farmer died in a car accident 25 days ago. After that, he drank a lot of wine alone at home, and there was no news after that. Until a few days ago, he spent $1 million in cash to buy a motorcycle. Later, he seemed to have saved a woman and a child, and his cash seemed to be from some time ago. Among the things lost by the major gangs in Hell's Kitchen, the currently known abilities include summoning ninjas and freezing abilities. Hill watched Nick slowly tell Carl's information. Classify his information as level 8 secret, and recall Natasha Romanoff. Her leave is over, and ask her to get in touch with this Carl to see if he can be used by us. Nick raised his head and faced Hill ordered. Yes, Director, but I don't recommend him to be used by us, not to mention that he first stole, and then he controlled those ninjas to kill without even blinking. This person is too cold-blooded, I'm afraid. Hill said to Nick said, expressing his opinions and concerns. Hill, didn't he save a woman and a child? Moreover, the gang members he killed were all gang members. You and I both know what the gang members in Hell's Kitchen look like. He at least knows right from wrong and has some contact with him first. What's more, we are not vegetarians. Yes, Nick explained to Hill calmly, because Hill's worries are not useless, but Nick has absolute confidence. After all, S.H.I.E.L.D has attracted many people with special abilities over the years. Yes, Director. Carl didn't know that S.H.I.E.L.D had noticed him at the moment. Even if he knew, he didn't care. It would be a matter of time before S.H.I.E.L.D found out. Unless he hid in the deep mountains and old forests, in which case he might as well go to the flower grower's house, not to mention that he didn't know it now. How can the system trigger sign in? He can only try to see if participating in the plot will trigger sign in, or he needs to wait for time to trigger sign in. And now he has led the Black Shadow Ninja to the Fisk building, which is Kingpin's lair. Kingpin also directly took out heavy weapons, including machine guns, RPGs, Gatlings, and a series of heavy weapons, and even a small missile. Kill. Carl looked at this scene and couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Kingpin, you must be afraid, right? As Carl's voice fell, the black ninja behind him disappeared behind him, and appeared directly in the Fisk building gang member the next second. Behind him, Katana impaled the gang members in suits, and they were almost wiped out before even using their weapons. Carl slowly walked from a short distance away and entered the Fisk building directly. Blue light flashed around him, and the surrounding walls began to freeze, and even began to spread to the upper floors, and all the gang members who came into contact with the ice had their feet frozen, and then Carl asked the Black Shadow Ninja to start killing, because now all the gang members in Fisk Tower have their feet frozen and are unable to resist. Ah, bang, ah, how is this going? Bang, help. It's a devil, you are devils, ah, ... In 10 minutes, all the gang members in the entire building except the floor where Jinpin was located were killed. Then Carl sat on a chair, and 2 shadow ninjas appeared behind him. A hand was put on Carl's shoulder, and then they sank down. On the floor where Kingpin was located, there were only Kingpin, Jesk, and a mysterious man wearing a black hood. At this moment, Kingpin was sinister. Sullen because he too was frozen by Carl. Because he found that he couldn't break free, and if he tried to break free, his legs would be broken, because this was a perfect frozen fruit that had been strengthened by the woodcutter's fountain. It was definitely not the frozen fruit before. Jesk was also frozen, and only the mysterious man in the black hood was not affected. Brush. 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 A large group of shadow ninjas appeared directly in front of them, and Carl slowly emerged from the darkness sitting on a chair, and looked at the fat bald man in front of him with interest, which was Kingpin. Then he glanced at the mysterious hood next to him, and then slowly said, Kingpin, you still have 1 minute to say your last words. While I'm in a good mood, you still have a chance to say it. Do it. Don't forget, I am your employer. Jin did not answer Carl's words, but said to the man wearing a hooded coat next to him, and Carl also turned his attention to that man. Definitely. The mysterious man in the hood said slowly, and it turned out to be a pleasant female voice. Carl couldn't help but find it a bit interesting. After all, Carl knew everyone who had the ability to deal with him, but the person in front of him was not among them. Then attacks composed of white psychokinesis suddenly appeared in the surroundings and attacked Carl, but at this moment she also revealed her true face. Carl looked at this and suddenly felt a little familiar. He waved an ice wall casually, and then thought for a while, suddenly come to think of it, isn't this a spiritual disc? Ability seems to be able to transform psychokinesis into various weapons. Although I don't know how Kingpin found her, Carl will not coddle her. When Carl waved the ice wall, the surrounding shadow ninjas also rushed towards Psylocke, but due to psychokinesis, they were almost unable to get close to the spirit disc. After seeing this, Carl condensed an ice dragon and controlled it to crash into Psylocke. He wanted to see whether her psychokinesis was more powerful or his own control. Boom. In the end, Carl was slightly better. Psylocke was directly knocked away by the ice dragon. Then when she wanted to continue fighting, Carl directly froze her whole body, except for the heart and head. After all, Carl's ability to control freezing is not just about making ice. Even water molecules in the human body can be frozen directly. Before, he wanted to see who was stronger, but now that the competition was over, Carl was naturally too lazy to play with her. Then he walked up to Jin Bin, condensed an ice sword in his right hand, and stabbed Jin Bin directly. Boom. Kingpin actually rolled away. Unexpectedly, he took advantage of the fight between himself and Psylocke to shoot at the ice below with his pistol, and then broke free from the ice under his feet. Kingpin held his cane. Immediately launched a spiritual attack on Carl, but Carl knew that he would not be his opponent in melee combat, so how could he fight him in melee combat? He slowly raised his right hand, and then sprayed an ice mist at Jin Bin. 3 seconds later, Jin Bin turned into an ice sculpture. Carl circled around Kingpin and saw that Kingpin's thumb holding the cane in his right hand was already on the switch of the cane. He knew that Kingpin's cane could emit a laser, which is why Carl decided to directly he froze. Although he might not be in trouble, he didn't want to ruin his clothes. Then he slapped the ice sculpture with his right hand, and the ice sculpture shattered, and a generation of underground overlords, Jin Bin, died. Chapter 11 Black Widow Attacks. Advertise here. Chapter 11. The Black Widow is coming. Carl looked at the ice sculpture fragments at his feet with an expressionless expression. If Carl hadn't arrived too suddenly, Jin wouldn't have been killed by Carl so easily. After all, it had only been an hour since Jin sent Mutant out to attack Carl. He didn't even gather all his forces, he just asked the gangsters in Hell's Kitchen to stop or kill Carl. After all, the dark world is not only about gangsters, killers, mercenaries, etc. are all standard in the dark world. Not to mention that as long as he is willing to spend money, there will be a large number of mutants who will work for him, but there is no regret medicine in the world. In the end, he died in the hands of Carl, and Carl turned around and looked at Psylocke who was frozen by himself. Carl thought for a while, blue light flashed in his eyes, and the heart and brain in Psylocke's body were directly frozen by Carl. He was frozen to death by Carl. Carl slowly walked out of the door of Jinpin's office, and the moment Carl stepped out of the door, the remaining Jesk Kress in the office had his head cut off by the shadow ninja behind Carl. Then 2 shadow ninjas appeared behind Carl, taking Carl into the shadow world, and from the Fisk building. When the ground appeared, Carl took the motorcycle out of the system space, put on his helmet and turned the throttle to leave, but he didn't even destroy the surrounding surveillance cameras. Carl knew that he had made such a big noise. The major departments of the American Conquest and S.H.I.E.L.D. must have known about it, so there was no need to hide it. Carl had a bad opinion of S.H.I.E.L.D. Although they monitor the extraordinary abilities on the Earth, and the first goal is to maintain world security. But let's not mention that 80% of the entire department is HYDRA. S.H.I.E.L.D's contribution is naturally indelible, but it only takes the Earth as the overall picture. S.H.I.E.L.D's attitude towards ordinary people is relatively tough. How can it talk nonsense with you? And Carl doesn't believe that it will be clean even without HYDRA S.H.I.E.L.D. Carl doesn't like being supervised, so as for joining S.H.I.E.L.D., he has never had this idea, and he is not even interested in the Avengers Carl they prepared. After all, he is not a hero, and the price of being a hero is very high. Even if he has the Black Shadow Ninja, he can't guarantee that he can 100% guarantee the safety of the people around him. Although it is not available now, it will be sooner or later. So if S.H.I.E.L.D. offends him, Carl doesn't mind letting HYDRA's affairs be exposed in advance, or killing him in front of the damn Fok man. With Dark Ninja, Carl can easily enter S.H.I.E.L.D's headquarters and even Nick Fury's office. Carl drove his motorcycle wildly towards his farm. As he passed through Queens, a few pairs of scarlet eyes behind him blended into the night and disappeared. Carl sent 5 Black Shadow Ninjas to Aunt May and Parker's place. By the way, to protect their safety, although he and Aunt May have nothing now, it would be bad if S.H.I.E.L.D. or other forces threatened him with Aunt May and Parker because he had been to Aunt May's house. The Black Shadow Ninjas will hide in their shadows, and will only come out when they are in fatal danger, and transfer them both immediately. Even if Carl and May have no contact in the future, if they are involved in some incidents because of Carl, it's always not good to go inside. He also took Peter's father's formula, so he owed them a bit. Jean Carl had no mercy towards gangsters or the dark world. But May and Parker, Carl couldn't do it, and these 5 ninjas were just an insurance policy. After Carl returned to his farm, he released hundreds of shadow ninjas to lurk around the house. After he parked his car, he returned to the second floor to sleep. After all, he killed people all night. Although he didn't do much, but it was uncomfortable to watch the Shadow Ninja massacre nearly 3,000 people with my own eyes, and Carl was just a worker some time ago. During this time, Carl forced himself to change his mentality, but the feeling of killing was still uncomfortable. He fell asleep immediately after falling on the bed. After Carl fell asleep, pairs of scarlet lights lit up outside the house, inside the room, and in the living room. If someone sneakily wants to enter Carl's house now, they will undoubtedly be attacked by all the Shadow Ninjas, or even killed directly. The next day, Carl lay on the bed and slowly opened his eyes, looking at the familiar ceiling, feeling relieved. Every night when he went to bed these days, he was afraid that he would wake up the next day and travel through time again, but luckily, every time you can all see the familiar ceiling. Carl rubbed his hair and sat up. Several pairs of scarlet eyes flashed behind him and disappeared behind Carl. Carl walked into the bathroom to wash up, changed a set of clothes and walked out of the room. Carl wore a white and gold shirt, and black suit pants and black leather shoes. After walking downstairs to the living room, several Shadow Ninjas had already prepared breakfast and placed them on the dining table. The few Shadow Ninjas who disappeared behind Carl just now came to make breakfast for him. Carl ate after breakfast. We rode a motorcycle to Manhattan, New York. Carl found a coffee shop and ordered a cup of coffee and sat there, because he could be said to have nothing to do now, or he didn't know what to do. In this case, just enjoy life, while Carl looked outside in a daze. When, a voice remembered. Hello sir, here's your coffee. Carl slowly looked towards the source of the sound. A sexy woman with big burgundy waves wearing a coffee shop uniform said to Carl and put the coffee on the table in front of Carl. Carl was very shocked, but he did not show it. Thank you, Carl said to the sexy waitress with big burgundy waves without changing his expression. Please use it slowly, the waiter said to Carl and winked before leaving. Carl looked at her back and couldn't help but sigh, isn't she just a black widow? This figure. But Carl felt more solemn in his heart, because the sexy waitress with burgundy waves just now was a S.H.I.E.L.D. 7 agent, and also the famous Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. And her appearance here also means that S.H.I.E.L.D. has noticed him. Carl glanced at the coffee on the table and said, the coffee the Black Widow brewed for you, do you dare to drink it? Carl doesn't dare to drink it anyway. Natasha Romanoff was also at the bar, consciously or unconsciously observing Carl who was looking at the street outside in a daze, and Carl naturally knew. Chapter 12 Date with Aunt May. Advertise here. Chapter 12. Date with Aunt May. Carl thought back to Natasha Romanoff's figure, face, and sexy figure just now, but Carl was not interested in her. After all, she was a figure in the same period as Captain America. She is now 80 years old if not 90 years old, and Natasha Romanoff was indispensable when performing tasks. It wasn't that Carl was slandering her in his heart, but it was probably that even she herself didn't know how many men she had had. Although Carl doesn't particularly mind if it's the first time, you are simply a gene pool. Carl has no interest in her at all, but she is a nice person. In the movies she watched in her previous life, she always cared about the Women's Federation's Golgotha. The status of the members, even sacrificing themselves for Soul Gem in the end. Everyone has their own way of living. Although he is not interested in her, he does not hate her. While he was thinking about it, Carl's cell phone suddenly rang. Ding. There are not many people who have Carl's mobile phone number and can contact him. Without thinking about it, Carl knew it should be Aunt May, and then connected. Hello. Hey, Carl, I'm May. I want to do something this afternoon. Can you go with me? If you have time. I have time. Okay, thank you, Carl. Are you at home now? I'll come over. Yes, I'm still at home. Okay, I'll come over now and hang up. May sat on the sofa and listened to the beeping sound of the phone hanging up in her ear. She suddenly went crazy. She was so obsessed that she actually called Carl and even lied to her that she was going to do something and asked him if he couldn't accompany him, and Carl agreed and even came later. May reached out and patted her face. At this moment, she regretted the stupid thing she had done. She didn't know why she wanted to call Carl, and even actually called him. After calming down for 30 seconds, May got up and went to her room. Go and start picking out clothes. After all, Carl is already on the way here. The other side. The corners of Carl's mouth curled up slightly after hanging up the phone. He didn't expect Aunt May to call him, because his mind was a little confused now. He didn't plan to pursue Aunt May immediately, but planned to enjoy life for a few days and wait for Tony Stark to go. After being kidnapped in the Middle East, go and rescue him. By the way, he was asked to perfect the super gene and create one for him, but now Aunt May's call interrupted his plan, and then Carl came to the bar and paid for the coffee before leaving, while Natasha Romanoff used her seductive eyes looked directly at Carl, who glanced at her coldly and then left. Carl then stepped onto the motorcycle and left. The target didn't drink the coffee and has already left. Natasha Romanoff put her right hand on her ear and spoke into the headset inside. She took off her apron and left the cafe directly, while other waiters put her hands in their hands. After taking over the apron, all the service staff in this cafe were actually S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. There was even a black car outside that also drove in the direction of Carl after he left. When Carl was approaching Queens, he naturally noticed someone following him. Then a black light flashed in his eyes, and several pairs of scarlet eyes appeared in the shadow of the vehicle, and they sneaked behind Carl until they came to follow Carl. Under the car, he inserted his katana from the bottom of the car without hesitation, destroying the car's power system, and then disappeared. It's not that Carl hasn't thought about killing them all directly, but this means becoming an enemy of S.H.I.E.L.D. Although S.H.I.E.L.D's agents can't pose any threat to him, there are too many of them and they will be annoying to death, and damn Frankman, he also has Captain Marvel's quantum pager in his hand. It wouldn't be fun if he calls Captain Marvel back from the universe if the fuss gets too big. He didn't want to hide in the world of Shadow all the time. After the vehicle was destroyed by the Shadow Ninja, Carl accelerated into a black alley. Then several Shadow Ninjas took him and the motorcycle into the world of Shadow, and from he appeared in an alley not far from Peter's house in Queens, but Carl was the only one. He placed the motorcycle in the world of shadows. After all, he didn't believe that his motorcycle hadn't been installed and positioned while he was sitting in the coffee shop. He might as well have left it in the shadow world, and then Carl walked towards Peter's home. Sir, the target location has disappeared. Even our vehicle seems to have been vandalized. He should have discovered us. An agent in the black vehicle reported to Natasha Romanoff. Got it, contact the headquarters and check the surrounding surveillance to see where he is. Let's do this for today. You don't have to follow him. Pressing too hard will be counterproductive. Natasha Romanoff's faint voice came from their headsets, and she didn't think that he was discovered so quickly. Yes, sir. Carl arrived at Peter's house after walking for 10 minutes, and then walked up and knocked on the door. Cack clack. Come on, wait a minute. Gotta. Carl, you're here, come in quickly. May said to Carl, and Carl looked at Aunt May who was wearing a purple dress in front of him and couldn't help being stunned. The purple dress showed all of Aunt May's temperament and charm, and gave people a gentle feeling. Coupled with Aunt May's plump figure, Carl's heart beat hard twice. Okay, May, you are so beautiful today. Carl praised Aunt May after coming back to his senses. Thank you, please sit in the living room for a while. I'll be ready soon, May said while pouring a drink for Carl, and then walked upstairs. Okay. Carl leaned on the sofa and waited for Aunt May. 20 minutes later, Aunt May came down wearing a khaki coat and carrying a satchel. Carl's eyes couldn't help but shine. At this moment, Aunt May had put on light makeup and had a good figure. She looked particularly charming when paired with her clothes. When May saw Carl looking at her blankly, a trace of joy flashed through her heart. She didn't know why she wanted to show her most charming side to Carl. After calming down in the room for a few minutes, she finally looked at herself. She seemed to have a crush on Carl. Coupled with the emptiness and loneliness she had experienced over the years, she wants to try. Chapter 13 Aunt May's Tenderness. Advertise here. Chapter 13. Aunt May's Tenderness. Carl, let's go. Oh, okay. Ahem. You're so beautiful, I can't help myself. After Carl came back to his senses, he looked at Aunt May's smiling eyes with a bit of embarrassment and reluctantly explained. Really? Okay. Let's go. May looked at Carl with a smile, then took Carl's arm and the two walked out of the door. After May didn't see Carl's motorcycle, she took him to take a taxi on the street. The destination of the taxi was a romantic Western restaurant in Manhattan. Carl definitely didn't know it. After May recognized her feelings for Carl, she decided to play straight. 20 minutes later, May brought Carl to a Western restaurant. After Carl and May entered, they found that it was actually a romantic restaurant, even more suitable for dates, and there was also a music performance. May looked at Carl a little nervously. Carl was just stunned for a moment, and then didn't say much, just showed a shallow smile. He seemed to know what Aunt May meant by bringing him here. After the two of them sat down, after Aunt May ordered, they sat facing each other. No one said anything, and May's palms had begun to sweat. After all, she had always told Carl that she wanted to do something and asked him to. I went there with myself, but now. May, are we planning on going on a date? It depends on what you think. May was slightly startled when she heard Carl's question, and then met Carl's gentle eyes. Her heart immediately calmed down, and then she teased Carl. It would be my pleasure, beautiful lady. I thought you would reject me. After all, I'm much older than you. May secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but said to Carl a little nervously. Age is not a problem for me. By the way, just wait for me. Carl looked at Aunt May tenderly and then slowly stood up and left the restaurant. Then he walked to the flower shop not far away and selected things inside. After a while, I finally chose violet because it has many flower meanings, but Carl's favorite is the sentence, eternal beauty and love. After returning to the restaurant with a bouquet of violets, he came to Aunt May and handed the flowers to her. The violets just matched Aunt May's purple dress. Carl then sat down and spoke slowly. I hope your beauty will last forever. Thank you, I like it very much. After hearing Carl's words, May felt as sweet as honey. She didn't understand why Carl bought violets at first, but she didn't expect. Then the food she ordered was brought out. While Carl was eating, May took out her mobile phone and looked up the flower language of violets, because she always felt that the sentence just now was wrong. Then she saw what was displayed on her phone. The flower language of violets, eternal beauty and love. After May saw the word love, her heart beat twice fiercely, and Carl gave the violet to herself. Didn't it mean that he also loved her? May looked at Carl quietly. Carl didn't realize that May was looking at her. He didn't even know that she was looking up the violet flower language on her mobile phone because he was concentrating on cooking at the moment. Although he had eaten a lot of Western food in the past few days, he didn't even know. It tasted terrible, maybe because of the time travel. He didn't like what he ate before at all, and the Chinese restaurants in New York were not authentic Chinese food and tasted weird. Seeing Carl eating, May breathed a sigh of relief and pretended to eat as if nothing had happened. Natasha Romanoff on the other side also learned through the message from Hill that Carl was now in a Western restaurant in Manhattan with a woman. After a date, Natasha Romanoff rushed here. Although she didn't intend to push too hard, surveillance was very necessary. After Carl and May finished eating, they left the restaurant. May held Carl's arm and walked down the street. Neither of them spoke. After walking for a while, the two sat down on a park bench, and then May put her head leaning on Carl's shoulder. He spoke slowly. Carl, you know. Carl listened quietly to Aunt May's confession, but what he said seemed to be a confession to Carl. After all, Americans are not as reserved in their feelings towards each other as flower growers. They are very bold and will express their thoughts directly. After all, Carl had seen many scenes of foreign girlfriends proposing to their boyfriends in his previous life, but he had never seen it in the flower garden. Maybe it was relatively rare. Carl looked at May and said how he felt about him, and then he pressed directly on Aunt May's mouth. Well, then Aunt May wrapped her hands around Carl's neck and kissed Carl crazily. The two kissed passionately on a park bench. They slowly separated after 5 minutes. After they separated, Aunt May gasped. After all, she didn't Carl's physique. Let's walk home, okay. Aunt May looked at Carl with loving eyes and said. Good. Then Carl hailed a taxi and the taxi drove to Queens. The scene just now was clearly seen by Natasha Romanoff and recorded. They returned home 20 minutes later, because it was only about 1 o'clock at noon. Peter was still at school, and there was no one at home. Carl and Aunt May entered the room and started kissing passionately, and the clothes on their bodies began to slip off. The two of them didn't even get to the room, they were directly in the living room on the first floor. In one afternoon, Carl ended his life as a child from his previous life to the present, and had sex in the living room, kitchen, and toilet. Their figures. Carl was lying on the bed in Aunt May's room and looked at the beautiful beauty who had fallen asleep next to him. He couldn't help but smile. Just now he felt the tenderness that belonged to Aunt May. 10 minutes later, Carl walked out of the house and walked to an alley not far away. There were at least 200 shadow ninjas hiding in the darkness in Aunt May's house. If anyone broke in, they would immediately bring Aunt May in. After confirming that Aunt May has entered the world of shadow, they will also enter the world of shadow and wait for Carl's call. After Carl walked into an alley, air conditioning immediately emanated from it, and then the entire alley was frozen. Carl looked at the two agents in black suits who were frozen in front of him. After Carl finished exercising with Aunt May, there was a message from the dark ninja that he was being watched. S.H.I.E.L.D, it seems I have to find something for you to do. Carl muttered to himself as he looked at the two agents that had been frozen. Then he dispersed the ice and let the black ninja take off their clothes. Sure enough, one agent had tattoos of the HYDRA organization on his body, and even had fangs. It seems that HYDRA has also noticed me. I need to improve my strength as soon as possible. Then Carl directly entered the world of shadow and left, and Carl did not intend to care about the two S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. If that HYDRA was discovered by the HYDRA people, then he would be looking for an opportunity to reveal it to Nick Fury. If it was true, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent found out and saved him the trouble. Chapter 14 Tony goes to the Middle East. Advertise here. Chapter 14. Tony goes to the Middle East. After Carl finished solving the problem, he went directly back to his farm through the world of shadows. He sat on the sofa and turned on the TV that he had not turned on since coming to Marvel. The trophy for the highest honor awarded by the government to Tony Stark happened to be playing on it. And the scene of Obadiah Stane accepting the award on behalf of Tony Stark was played. When Carl saw this, he knew that Tony was about to go to the Middle East. In 3 months, he would become Iron Man, and then the chaos of the Marvel world would beginning. On the other side, Natasha Romanoff came to the place where Carl had dealt with the two S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. She was shocked when she saw a HYDRA tattoo on a person. Although she had never dealt with HYDRA, she still knew about them, and now a HYDRA he actually became a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. You must know that the predecessor of S.H.I.E.L.D. existed to eliminate HYDRA. She instantly understood that this was a serious matter, and they even offended Carl, who had massacred thousands of gangsters and even Kingpin. This is not good news. After all, Carl did not directly kill the agents who were following him before, but now these two agents are dead. It is probably because of what HYDRA did to Carl, causing Carl to kill them. If Carl knew, he would have to admire Natasha Romanoff's imagination. He had no such plan, he just didn't want anyone to spy on Aunt May. Now that Aunt May has become his woman, he would naturally not let her be harmed. There is Peter. A few hours later, after Natasha Romanoff finished disposing of the two corpses, she returned to the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters and went directly into Nick Fury's office. Seeing that Mary Jane Hill was also there, Natasha Romanoff immediately suppressed what she was about to say. Nick could tell that Natasha Romanoff seemed to have something to say, but he wasn't sure if Hill was trustworthy. She can be trusted. Tell me, weren't you spying on Carl? Why did you suddenly come back? Nick asked Natasha Romanoff, a little confused. Director, Carl killed two of our agents, and one of the agents had a HYDRA tattoo and fangs, which are exactly the same as the information recorded during World War II. Natasha Romanoff described what she saw. She said it all in one breath, and took out her phone to call up the photos she took. What? This is impossible. HYDRA had already been eliminated in World War II. Nick stood up in surprise and took the phone handed over by Natasha Romanoff. Looking at the picture on it, he was extremely shocked, and Hill also had a solemn look on his face. It's true. It has even infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. Block the news first. Stop all operations. We have to clean up the house. Nick made an immediate decision and said to Natasha Romanoff and Hill. Yes, Director. But Carl seems to know, because the tattoo was exposed when I arrived. He should know something. Natasha Romanoff expressed her guess. Okay, I understand. S.H.I.E.L.D. will block the news internally, and I will go see him in person. Yes, X2. At this moment, Carl didn't know that Nick Fury already knew that HYDRA was lurking in S.H.I.E.L.D. Even if he knew, he didn't care. He was thinking about whether he should bring Aunt May and Peter to the farm or buy a house in the city. After all, the New York City area is full of disasters, so I finally decided to ask Aunt May what she thought first. This is when the system voice suddenly sounded. Open black lens bracket ding. The host has been given an opportunity to sign in. Do you want to sign in now? Close black lens bracket. Carl was a little surprised when he heard the system prompt. He didn't expect to have the opportunity to sign in. Then he tried hard to think back. He just took down Aunt May today, and he happened to be in the Marvel world for 15 days, or killed Jin, and or kill the HYDRA S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. The other side. Pepper. Tony, you should be on your private jet at this time. Tony. No. Since it is my private jet, it should be waiting for me instead of me catching the plane. Otherwise, why would I need a private jet? Pepper. But you have to go to the Middle East today. It's a big order for the military. I've already received a call from Rhodes. Tony. Oh, okay, then I'll leave now. Then Tony drove his sports car and drove all the way to the airport, while his bodyguard Happy chased his boss in a Rolls-Royce. They arrived at the airport 30 minutes later, and Rhodes stood on the plane. Tony looked at the door of the cabin and complained. Hey, Tony, you kept me waiting for you for almost 4 hours. Hey Rod, didn't I tell you we were a few hours late? You didn't. You didn't even answer my call. I called you 5 times. Okay, it's okay. Let's set sail now. Trust me buddy, it will definitely make you feel great later. Come on Happy, we have to go. Okay, boss. After Happy put Tony's things into the plane took off directly, and Tony took Rod to start playing games with the sexy stewardess on the plane, and took Rod to experience a luxurious life, music, wine, beauty. In the evening, Carl came to Aunt May's house, and little Peter was also at home. However, he ran to the second floor to play games, while Aunt May was cooking in the kitchen. Carl walked behind her and slowly hugged her waist. Aunt May suddenly felt something, and her cheeks turned red instantly. This afternoon is not enough, you bad boy. Aunt May turned to Carl while cooking the food. Moi, not enough. Carl kissed Aunt May on her sexy lips and answered Aunt May tenderly. Well, after Carl answered, he kissed Aunt May fiercely on the mouth again, and Aunt May also kissed Carl passionately. Both of them wanted each other crazily, until Aunt May felt the changes in her body, and immediately pushed Carl away. Her face it was already red enough to bleed. After all, Peter was still at home, and he might come down later, but he was actually here with Carl. Peter is still at home, and I still have to cook, so stop it. Aunt May pretended to be fierce and said to Carl. Okay. Carl didn't move around, but quietly hugged Aunt May's waist. By the way, May, why don't you take Peter to live with me? There will be many disasters in New York in the near future, and I don't worry about you here. Carl said calmly, holding Aunt May's waist. It's not good. And it shouldn't be. We've been fine even after staying here for so long. Aunt May said to Carl a little embarrassed. After all, Carl just couldn't convince Aunt May unless he showed something. Then he let go of Aunt May's waist with his right hand, slowly raised it, and a hockey puck appeared in his right hand. And motioned to Aunt May to look. Oh Mag. Carl, are you a mutant? This. No, I am not a mutant. I have a special ability. That's why I know that New York will not be safe in the future, so I want you to move in with me. You won't have to work in the future. I will support you. Carl and May Auntie slowly explained and told her why she said that. I need to think about it. Good. Chapter 15 Signing in again. Advertise here. Chapter 15. Sign in again. Carl left after eating at Aunt May's house and did not stay overnight. Carl drove a black Lamborghini on the road and headed to his farm in the suburbs. Naturally, this sports car was not an ordinary sports car, but the one Carl signed in for in the afternoon. Time returns to the afternoon. After thinking about the logic of the system's sign-in mechanism to no avail, Carl asked the system to sign in. System, sign in. Open black lens bracket ding. Sign in successfully. Congratulations on getting. Cyber Robot, Speed X1, Fairy Bean X3, Super Ability Training Box X1. Close black lens bracket. Cyber Robot, Extreme Speed, a unique mechanical life from the world of shapeshifting King Kong. It can switch between Autobot, car, motorcycle, and modes at will. It has strong combat power and is always loyal to its host. Fairy Beans, a unique food from the world of Dragon Ball. It has extremely strong recovery power. As long as the person is not dead, it can restore physical strength and energy in the shortest time, almost instantaneously, during extreme fatigue, and recover and optimally adjust the body's injuries. State. Super Ability Training Box, a futuristic prop from the world of Doraemon, that can train 3 types of super abilities: psychokinesis, clairvoyance, and teleportation. It must be trained for 3 hours a day and takes 3 years to become fully proficient. Close black lens bracket. Yes, the speed, fairy beans, and super ability training boxes are all great. Take out the speed and have a look first. After Carl said to himself, he walked out of the room and lifted the speed out of the system space. A figure instantly appeared in front of him. The black Lamborghini then began to transform, turning into a black and silver Autobot in 2 seconds. Jisoo, I've seen the leader. Jisoo, who was nearly 9 meters tall, knelt on one knee and said to Carl. Very good, Jisoo, you should call me boss from now on. Carl looked at the nearly 9-meter Jisoo and felt extremely happy. After all, who didn't have a shapeshifting King Kong dream when they were young? But now Carl has realized it. He has his own shapeshifting King Kong. Yes, boss, let me see if you turn into a motorcycle. Carl ordered to Speedy. Yes, boss. Click click click. About 3 seconds later, the Speed turned into a motorcycle. The silver and black color scheme, coupled with the metallic texture and lines, made it look like a motorcycle that Carl said he bought for $1 million. As for the Speed, let alone the Speed, definitely surpasses the original locomotive. Okay, you stay in the garage first. By the way, you should be able to access the network, right? Carl ordered to Jisoo, and then asked again as if he thought of something. Yes, boss, I can enter the Earth's network. A very fast electronic sound came from the body. Then connect to the internet, keep an eye on Tony Stark's news, and create a virtual bank account. I'm going to deposit a lot of cash, Carl said to Speedy before walking into the house again. Yes, boss. After Carl entered the living room, he looked at the super ability training box taken out from the system space. According to the system introduction, it would take 3 years. Carl was in urgent need of improving his strength. How could he wait for 3 years? He took out a woodcutter's fountain and used it to place it on the ground, throw the super ability training box into it, take out the Nia mask and put it on, and use the ability of the frozen fruit to freeze your body in order to wake up later. With a burst of colorful light flashing, the woodcutter goddess appeared in front of Carl, holding 2 super ability training boxes and said to Carl. Excuse me, did you throw away this perfect super ability training box or this imperfect super ability training box? It was torture for Carl to listen to her words. Although the voice was pleasant, it was full of magic, tempting Carl to choose the perfect super ability training box. Carl used the freezing ability to create several ice needles and pierced his thighs, causing pain to spread. All over his body, Carl took the opportunity to say to the woodcutter goddess. What I threw away was the imperfect super ability training box. Congratulations, you passed the test, then this perfect super ability training box will be given to you. After the woodcutter goddess finished speaking, she disappeared, and the perfect super ability training box appeared in front of Carl. Carl, it seems that I have to get some mental shielding props, otherwise it will be too uncomfortable. Carl said fearfully. He almost got hit just now. Although he felt that he was awake, he was not awake. He knew exactly which one to say, but he couldn't. If it weren't for the stinging pain, this opportunity would have been wasted. Carl picked up the perfect super ability training box in front of him, and the system's annotation also came out. Perfect super ability training box. Props from the future world of Doraemon. With the strengthening of the woodcutter goddess, 3 abilities can be trained. Cyclops, psychokinesis control, and teleportation. You need to train for 30 minutes every day. Become proficient in 3 abilities in 3 months. Close black lens bracket. It seems that this time strengthening seems to be correct. You can get 3 super abilities in 3 months. And 3 months seems to be the time for Tony Stark to create the Mark 1. The time is just right. Carl murmured. He muttered to himself, then packed up, turned the Speed into a sports car, and drove towards New York City. And the virtual bank account that was created quickly was an account that could deposit a large amount of cash. After Carl entered a bank and entered the account, he left millions of cash and deposited more than $200 million in cash into the bank account. However, this scene did not cause any trouble. The bank staff were surprised, and Carl couldn't help but sigh at how powerful the speed was. Then after buying some things, we drove to Queens, and what happened next was what happened at Aunt May's house. And now Carl is driving towards his farm at top speed. Boss, there's someone at home. He's a one-eyed black man wearing a black leather jacket and leather trousers. Jisoo suddenly sounded, and after hearing Jisoo's description, Carl naturally knew who this person was. Isn't it F. Kamen? Nick Fury. Well, he seems to like waiting for people at other people's houses, and then pretending to be good at it. In the previous Life movie, he appeared in Tony Stark's villa like this. Chapter 16 Nick Fury arrives. Advertise here. Chapter 16. Nick Fury arrives. Since everyone was waiting for him at home, Carl naturally had to go and meet him. After all, he was a damn facker. Then he stepped on the accelerator and the Lamborghini turned into a black lightning and sped towards the suburban farm. 20 minutes later, Carl arrived home. He opened the door and walked straight in. Sitting on the sofa was a one-eyed black man wearing a black leather jacket and leather trousers. Carl thought to himself, and then walked to the kitchen and took out a bottle. Drink the soda. You said that if I kill you now, it shouldn't be illegal, right? Carl walked out of the kitchen with a soda and said to Nick Fury. Even if you don't kill me, you are still breaking the law. Nearly 3,000 people were killed and injured in Hell's Kitchen last night. It was you who did it. We already have evidence of your crime. The people you killed are enough to warrant you being shot 1,000 times. Nick Fury said to Carl calmly. Oh, what do you want? Carl said to Nick Fury with interest. I can protect you, but you must join S.H.I.E.L.D. and work for S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury heard Carl's words and thought he was going to give in. He spoke out his purpose with a hint of joy. Ha 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 ha. Nick Fury, are you here to be funny? You don't know what kind of people are in Hell's Kitchen. Your purpose is to want me to join S.H.I.E.L.D. and then be controlled by you. Why don't you protect me? What? Relying on the quantum pager in your pocket. Do you think I can kill you before Captain Marvel comes back? Carl couldn't help laughing after hearing Nick Fury's words, and said with a mocking the tone spoke to him. When Nick Fury heard Carl talking about the quantum pager and Captain Marvel, his pupils shrank a few times, because this was his deepest secret. He didn't understand how Carl knew about it, and then he pressed it vaguely. The alarm on his waist. Although he had been injected with the infinite formula, he knew that he could not beat Carl. The data showed that Carl could control ice and summon ninjas. Boss, there are 20 people with weapons approaching, do you want to take them down? Extreme's voice sounded from the Bluetooth in Carl's ear. After Carl took out Extreme, he put Extreme's exclusive Bluetooth on his ear. Take it off. Carl replied calmly after pressing Bluetooth. Yes, boss. How did you know? Nick Fury asked Carl pretending to be calm. After all, according to his investigation, Carl was just an ordinary person without awakening ability. I don't seem to have the need to answer you, and you don't need to expect the agents outside to save you. By the way, there is also the bow and arrow boy in the tree not far away. Carl said to him indifferently. Becoming an enemy to me will only make Mutant's situation worse. You must have thought clearly. Nick Fury saw that Carl was about to attack him. He pulled out the pistol on his waist and said loudly to Carl, even Nick Fury Rui's pistols are not ordinary pistols, they are energy pistols. No, you made a mistake. I am not a mutant, and my ability does not come from mutant genes. As for Mutant's situation, what does it have to do with me? Carl slowly explained to Nick Fury, and his eyes flashed with blue light. The next moment, Nick Fury's energy pistol was frozen, and he immediately threw it away, because the ice made by Carl was frighteningly low in temperature. If he hadn't thrown it away, it would probably have stuck to his hand. Carl waved his right hand lightly, and Nick Fury's whole body was frozen. Then Carl kicked him out of the door. Outside, more than 20 agents had already been put in. Although none of them were killed, most of them were injured. Even Clint Barton, also known as Hawkeye, was escorted by a group of shadow ninjas, and the injuries on his face could prove that he resisted, but failed. Carl lifted Nick Fury and threw him to them in front of him, then turned around and walked back, and said slowly. Don't bother me, otherwise you might not be able to go back next time. When Carl walked into the door, the black shadow ninja picked them up and threw them out of the farm. Carl sat alone on the sofa. The reason why he did not kill him was because he did not want to get Captain Marvel back now. What's more, he couldn't beat Aunt Surprise. Although he could run away, he couldn't keep running, not to mention that he still had May, so he had no choice but to let them go. Director, are you okay? An agent helped Nick Fury up and asked. It's okay, let's go. Nick Fury replied with a sullen face and then walked ahead to where the cars were parked. I will definitely shoot him with my bow and arrow next time. Hawkeye limped behind Nick Fury and said viciously, while Nick Fury did not speak and walked faster. A few points, not to mention that this time I was completely embarrassed. Carl took out the perfect super ability training box and started training. He just held the box and thought about which super ability to train. He didn't care about the consequences of beating Nick Fury and Hawkeye. Nick Fury went back now. He probably has to clean up HYDRA, so there is no time to deal with him, and he probably doesn't have many people he can trust now, so he said that to Carl before, but he wants to control him, Carl. It's just a ridiculous dream. Boss, there is news about Tony Stark that you brought my attention to. He was attacked by terrorists in the Middle East. His life and death are now unknown, and Stark Industries' stock price has begun to decline rapidly. A very fast electronic voice sounded from the Bluetooth in Carl's ear. Okay, I understand. After Stark Industries stocks drop to the lowest, we will buy all our money into Stark Industries stocks. And use 10 times leverage. Carl pressed his right hand on Bluetooth and said quickly. Yes, boss, but according to what I learned after connecting to the internet, we will only lose everything if we do this, boss. Jisoo said to Carl with a little hesitation. After all, he is loyal to Carl and will give priority to Carl's interests in everything. Don't worry, I know that Tony Stark will not die so easily. When he comes back, the stock will skyrocket. Carl explained to G-Speed calmly. Yes, boss, understand quickly. Then Carl began to continue to exercise abilities. Each ability needs to be exercised for 30 minutes. 3 abilities is 90 minutes. Chapter 17 Nick cleans up HYDRA. Advertise here. Chapter 17. Nick cleans up HYDRA. On the other side, after Nick Fury took Hawkeye and others back to the vehicle, he asked the surrounding agents with a dark face. Were you also attacked by those black ninjas? No, Director. We were attacked by a robot. It was at least 9 meters high. It was transformed from the target's Lamborghini. An agent firmly and shocked reported to Nick Fury. My method. Are you sure? Nick Fury looked at the agent who spoke suspiciously. Really? Director, we were all knocked down by that robot. The agent hurriedly explained to Nick Fury, and the other agents also nodded, because these were all agents promoted by Nick Fury himself, so HYDRA should not exist, so I brought it just in case. Record this. Let's go back. Nick Fury's eyes flashed with solemnity. After all, if it is true as they said, then this is definitely not Earth's technology. He guessed that there may be alien forces behind Carl. Yes, Director. After Nick Fury led everyone back to the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, he hurriedly walked to Alexander Pierce's office. He was going to discuss with him the cleanup of HYDRA. If Carl knew about it, he would probably laugh to death. He went to the head of HYDRA to discuss cleaning up HYDRA. After all, as the previous S.H.I.E.L.D. director, Pierce was the one who single-handedly promoted Nick Fury to the position of director, and has been supporting his plan at United Nations Security Council meetings around the world. Otherwise, where would he have gotten so much money to build a safe house, so he doubted that it would be difficult for anyone to suspect Pierce. In addition, this was not the time when the original timeline insight plan was implemented. It only exposed one agent and did not discover a large number of members of HYDRA. Drum drum drum. Enter. Click. Ahem. After Nick Fury entered the office, he motioned to Pierce to turn on the shielding device. This device was almost standard equipment in their offices, and it was definitely only found in the offices of Nick Fury and Alexander Pierce. What's wrong, Nick, so nervous? Pierce pressed the mute button next to the table, and then asked Nick Fury in confusion. Pierce, I recently discovered that there are people from HYDRA among our agents. I thought they had been eliminated during World War II, but I didn't expect that they have infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. now. Nick Fury said solemnly to Pierce, and what he didn't find out was that when Nick Fury said that he discovered that S.H.I.E.L.D. had HYDRA, Pierce thought he was exposed, and even his hand under the table had already touched the pistol. What? This is impossible. If that's the case, then we have to investigate it carefully. Pierce was surprised at first, and then said solemnly to Nick Fury, and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out that he just discovered I found out that the underlying agent was a member of HYDRA, but I wasn't exposed. At the same time, I cursed in my heart, what kind of waste was actually discovered by Nick? Yes, because HYDRA has always wanted to conquer the world, I'm going to start investigating immediately. I need your support, Pierce. Nick Fury said to Pierce firmly, and there was even a hint of anger, not to mention that he didn't know that S.H.I.E.L.D. is now how many HYDRA members are there. Okay, I will fully support you. Just do it, Nick. I believe in you. Pierce immediately agreed to Nick Fury and expressed that he would give him full support. After Nick Fury left, Pierce slapped his hand on the desk in front of him, then turned off the jammer, took out a special mobile phone, clicked on an encrypted number and called, and the call was connected soon after. Nick Fury found out that there are some of our people at the bottom. Now he is throwing out a few abandoned ones, as well as one of the middle-level people. And he told them to be careful. Pierce gritted his teeth and said to the person on the phone. Yes, leader. Pierce hung up the phone after hearing the other party's reply. Now is not the time to fall out with Nick Fury, because the Insight project has just begun, and the Sky aircraft carrier is still under construction. Now is not the time to fall out, even if Nick Fury is killed, the United Nations Security Council will choose another person to serve as director. The reason why he promoted Nick Fury is because he can control it. It would not necessarily be the case if it were someone else. But what he didn't know was that Nick Fury, whom he thought he could control, had a big killer in his hand, the Captain Marvel summoner. If Pierce knew about it, it would probably be another story, but in the plot, S.H.I.E.L.D. Even though he fell apart, he didn't summon Captain Marvel back, but Thanos clicked the quantum pager after snapping his fingers. Then Nick Fury asked Hill, Natasha Romanoff, Clint, and Phil Coulson to lead the team to arrest the suspicious persons, and directly killed them if they resisted. With the idea that he would rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let one go, S.H.I.E.L.D. came for a big purge. But what he didn't know was that he had always followed the path designed by Pierce, and finally caught him. A low-level agent, the middle-level agent directly detonated the bomb on him after being discovered. They even sacrificed many people, and the same happened to other HYDRA members. In the end, Hawkeye shot the bomb out of the man's hand, and then managed to catch one, but he was also seriously injured due to the explosion, and he still hasn't found out something. This made Nick Fury's face, which was already dark, even darker. And after being sent to the emergency room, he died of poisoning. The reason was that the poison in the fangs leaked out and was swallowed by him, causing the person to die just after entering the emergency room. Nick Fury was so angry that he kept King Fake in the office alone. Carl drove the Lamborghini towards Queens at high speed. He only slowed down a little in the city, but it also made many bold American women exclaim. Carl didn't care at all and drove to Aunt May's house. After arriving at Aunt May's house, everyone around looked at Carl. You must know that a sports car is not common in Queens, let alone parked in front of his neighbor's house. Carl opened the car door and took out a bouquet of blue roses. Wah walked to the door of Aunt May's house. When the people around him saw Carl walking to Aunt May's house, they looked like they were suddenly enlightened. Moreover, they had all met Aunt May and knew that Aunt May was a mature and beautiful woman who still had charm. Drum drum drum. Chapter 18 Living with Aunt May. Advertise here. Chapter 18. Living with Aunt May. Click. The door opened from the inside, and Carl happened to see Aunt May in an apron. Carl, you're here, Aunt May said with a bit of joy when she saw it was Carl. It's for you, do you like it? Carl handed the blue rose in his hand to Aunt May and entered the house. I like it. Aunt May took the blue rose handed over by Carl, put it under her nose and smelled it, while Carl climbed on Aunt May's waist, then took her into his arms, looking at the moment Aunt May, the corners of her lips are curled up, a thin hook is curved at the end of her eyes, and she sweeps it up to her temples, making people's soul float. Both of them looked into each other's eyes. Aunt May's lips were so red that they were dripping with water. Her face was like the sunset, and her eyes were blurred. Carl could no longer bear to look at that alluring face. The red lips kissed, and Aunt May responded crazily to Carl's love. Just like that afternoon, Carl once again felt the tenderness that belonged to Aunt May, and the madness hidden under her gentle appearance, which almost overwhelmed Carl. After a fight, Carl hugged Aunt May and sat on the bed. Have you considered it? Come live with me, and Peter too. If you think the suburbs are too far, I can buy a villa in Manhattan. Carl asked gently, hugging Aunt May. No, Carl, no, you don't have to do this for me. We can live together, but I don't like you blindly giving, okay? Aunt May put her hand on Carl's mouth and said to Carl gently, although the two of them neither person explicitly stated their relationship with the other person, but they both knew it. After Carl heard Aunt May's words, he loved her even more. After all, in the previous life, many people wished that the other party would give blindly, but he enjoyed being favored by the other party, and felt confident. Although Carl did not mind, Aunt May this passage was clearly a plus and one that struck a chord with Carl. Okay, tomorrow happens to be Saturday. How about coming home with me after picking up Peter later? Carl took off Aunt May's soft and boneless hand from his mouth, and then said to Aunt May suggested. Then, how should I tell Peter about my relationship? Aunt May didn't know how to face Peter's feelings, after all. It doesn't matter, just tell Peter that I will be his uncle in the future. Carl said after hugging Aunt May and kissing her on the forehead. That's okay. Carl and Aunt May stayed in bed until the evening, while Carl went to pick up Peter and Aunt May packed some things that needed to be brought. Boom. Carl drove the Lamborghini to Peter's school, and on the other side. Ha 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 ha, he is just a child without a father and a mother. He is Peter Parker. That's right, he's still a poor guy. Father, he was the one who broke my pencil case. A little boy led a big man toward Peter, and the little boy pointed at Peter. No, it's not me, sir. I didn't break your son's pencil case. Peter quickly proved his innocence and immediately denied that he had done it. He even sounded like he was about to cry. After all, he was still just a boy. A child of 6 or 7 years old will naturally feel scared when facing a big man. Lil, who is it? The big man asked his son. Father, that's him. The kid named Lil pointed directly at Peter, and Peter was already a little panicked at this moment, with tears streaming down his face. He was mumbling that it was not him, while the big man walked towards Peter, just when he was about to catch Peter. Boom. Boom. Because they were in front of the school, they happened to see a Lamborghini coming in from the street, and the driver of this Lamborghini was Carl. He had already seen Peter crying, and there was a big man standing in front of Peter, who was in love with Woojiwoo because of Aunt May. Carl was naturally furious, and then he pushed the accelerator to the limit and the Lamborghini rushed in the direction of Peter like a black beast. Just when they were about to collide, Carl drifted and stopped in front of them. Everyone, including Peter, was frightened. When the big man came to his senses, he immediately cursed at Carl. Yellow-skinned monkey, are you looking for death? Fake. Carl turned around and slapped him, but not with too much force, but he also slapped him to the ground, then walked over to Peter and squatted down. Did they bully you? Peter, tell me, who is it? No, brother Carl, he said I broke his pencil case, but I didn't. He called him father. Peter cried and said to Carl. Okay, I get it, I'll solve it. Carl took out a tissue from his pocket and wiped away Peter's tears, then turned around and looked at the big man. Yellow-skinned monkey, you are looking for death. How dare you attack me? The big man immediately waved his fist and attacked Carl. Carl dodged his attack and then kicked him to the ground. The man who shouted before, the little boy from Lille and the group of children who were laughing at Peter, had already hid far away and kept looking this way. Carl took out a stack of US dollars from his pocket, which was actually taken from the system space, and then threw it in front of the big man. Carl said calmly. This is the pencil case Peter gave you. And once again he kicked down the big man, who stood up, and then took Peter towards the direction of the Lamborghini. The big man didn't stand up after falling to the ground. Of course he was fine, he was just pretending, and he could take it out easily. 10,000 US dollars, and driving such a luxury car, is certainly not something someone like him can afford. He can only use his muscles to show off to some people around him. When he meets a real ruthless person, he doesn't know how he died. What's more, in this country where money is supreme, as long as you have money, there are all kinds of people. I am willing to work hard for you. Not to mention that it is not illegal to possess firearms in this country. After Carl took Peter into the Lamborghini, he stepped on the accelerator and left. Peter hesitated to speak. Carl couldn't help but want to laugh, but he didn't take the initiative to speak and took him directly back to Aunt May's house. After returning to Aunt May's house, Aunt May had already packed her things. Peter didn't even get out of the car, so Aunt May got in, while Peter was thrown behind by Carl. Although it was a two-seater car, it was so fast that it didn't seem difficult to open a seat for Peter in the back, and then Carl took Aunt May and Peter to his farm. Carl and Aunt May were talking and laughing along the way, while Peter sat in the back alone in a daze, but he was still very excited because it was the first time in his life to ride in a sports car. Although he was surprised about the relationship between Aunt May and Carl, he was still young and didn't understand it, so he just thought it was a good relationship. 20 minutes later, Carl brought Aunt May and Peter to the house on his farm. Because he planned to live with Aunt May, he had already asked the Black Shadow Ninja to clean the house and even the farm, not to mention that they will be tired, a proper tool man. They are simply the favorite of capitalists. After all, they can work 24 hours a day without getting tired, without wages, without going to the toilet, without eating, and without socializing. Chapter 19 3 months. Advertise here. Chapter 19. 3 months. After Carl brought Aunt May and Peter to the farm, he then walked into the house. Aunt May looked at Carl with a little surprise. Now in America, there are not many men who can do housework and do it well, and although Carl's family doesn't say much, gorgeous, but spotless and very clean. But what she didn't know was that these were all the work of the Black Shadow Ninja. How could Carl do it himself? Then Carl took Aunt May and Peter to the second floor and took them to the room. Carl naturally let Aunt May share a room with him, and Aunt May just gave Carl a shy and angry look, then acquiesced, and then go to the kitchen to make dinner. Carl was playing games with Peter on the second floor. After dinner, Aunt May entered Peter's room to chat with him. Besides, she was with Carl now, and she believed that Peter also had many questions now. Carl walked out of the door and released 500 shadow ninjas lurking in the darkness around the house and farm. Now that Aunt May and Peter are here, safety is naturally the top priority, and there are also shadows of Aunt May and Peter. There were no less than 10 shadow ninjas protecting their safety at all times. After Carl finished all this, he went to his room. Lying on the bed in the room, Aunt May is still chatting with Peter. Although he can eavesdrop with the Black Shadow Ninja, it is not necessary. He believes that Aunt May will handle it by herself. He lies on the bed and looks at the ceiling, recalling the experiences of these days. There are also a lot of emotions about the things he did. First, he traveled through Marvel, robbed the gang, destroyed Kingpin, stayed with Aunt May, beat up Nick Fury, and did things that were impossible to do in his previous life. While Carl was thinking a lot, the door to the room opened. Gotta. Aunt May walked in wearing a dark purple nightgown and a long coat. She took off her shoes and lay next to Carl. Carl looked at Aunt May intently, because he was deeply attracted by the charm that Aunt May always exuded. He couldn't protect himself. Carl, thank you. Aunt May leaned her head on Carl's shoulder and said softly. Huh, thank me for what? Carl turned his head and looked at Aunt May, asking a little doubtfully. What happened to Peter this afternoon? I didn't even know he was at school. It's okay. How about changing Peter to another school? After all, he doesn't get along well with his classmates. This semester is not long. How about next semester? How about asking Peter for his opinion? Okay, let's ask Peter's opinion and let's go to bed. Carl looked at the beautiful Aunt May and rushed towards him. Then Aunt May felt Carl's love, and Carl felt Aunt May's madness, but both of them were more controlled, although their room was separated from Peter's room. A guest room, but the soundproofing of this house was not good. Aunt May gritted her teeth and covered her mouth to prevent herself from making any sound. But she felt extremely excited, not to mention that her nephew was in the room not far away, and she was here with her lover. Middle East desert region. In a cave in a valley, Tony Stark was dismantling missiles with a man wearing glasses, and the man wearing glasses, Yingson, used his medical skills to revive Tony, and then he was between Tony and the Ten Rings terrorists. Acting as a translator and Tony's assistant, as in the plot, Tony was asked by terrorists to build Jericho missiles, but he did not agree at first until he gave in after being tortured for a period of time. What he and Yingson are doing now is to dismantle all the missiles and take out the target elements inside. He plans to make himself a miniature arc reactor to maintain his life and absorb the missile fragments in his blood vessels so that they cannot flow into his heart. After some smelting, pouring it into a mold made of sand, and some more fabrication, Tony finally made the reactor. What's this? The micro-arc reactor can replace this damn magnet to keep me alive. And I don't have to hold this big battery anymore. How's his power generation? It's 3 billion joules per second. I have a big one at home, which is used to power factories. It will last you a lifetime. I think so. S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Nick Fury looked at Carl's information on the computer in front of him, as well as the information about Aunt May and Peter. It was very simple to know this information with S.H.I.E.L.D's ability, but he could only let people monitor him, and he could not monitor Carl or the others. So after Carl directly revealed his trump card, he became very jealous of Carl. He always felt that he knew a lot of things, and even suspected that Carl knew that there were HYDRA members in S.H.I.E.L.D. He rubbed his brows with a headache. He was under a lot of pressure now. He had just cleared out the HYDRA members and didn't even get any information. However, Tony Stark, the president of Stark Industries, disappeared in the Middle East. This made the Security Council very dissatisfied, and asked him to get Tony Stark back as soon as possible. Because of the close relationship between Stark Industries and the military, Tony Stark has disappeared. The most urgent thing is naturally the military, and then the American government. Moreover, the taxes paid by Stark Industries every year are astronomical. Now that Tony Stark is missing, the stock crazy decline, let alone the future research and development of military weapons, even taxes will be reduced by then. America's tax bureau has a lot of power. Even the President of America cannot escape the fate of paying taxes. Even the tax bureau has the right to directly mobilize the military and even the Navy SEALs. In addition, Stark Industries has accumulated a lot of money since Howard Stark. The connections all put pressure on the government, even on members of parliament. And they can only let Nick Fury get Tony Stark back as soon as possible. Stark Industries, America's leading arms company, is not that simple. Even the most powerful generals in the military have questioned the military base that originally escorted Tony Stark. Responsibility. If the major congressmen hadn't stopped them, they would have mobilized troops to the Middle East. After all, if Tony Stark dies, who will help them research advanced weapons? Nowadays, wars are fought based on who has the best weapons. Wherever people are still crowded like in World War II. If they don't have weapons, what do you want them to use to fight with? Nick Fury could only send Phil Coulson to lead a team to the Middle East to find Tony Stark. Even if there was no pressure from the Security Council, he would have to find Tony Stark. After all, he was the son of Howard Stark, one of the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D. You have to find someone privately. Chapter 20 Tony's Blacksmithing Diary. Advertise here. Chapter 20. Tony's Blacksmithing Diary. Carl has been living a life of no shame and impatience with Aunt May, and Peter also knew that Carl became Aunt May's lover, and he readily accepted it. After all, he was still young and did not understand some emotions. What's more, Carl was not bad to him and bought him everything. He still recognized Carl in his heart. For a period of time after that, Peter went back to live in Queens when he was going to school, and went back to the farm on weekends. Moreover, after Peter went to school, Carl took Aunt May on various dates, shopping, etc., making Aunt May feel like back to my youth again. Later, when Peter was away, Carl would even take Aunt May back to the farm. Even after returning to the farm, Aunt May could let out her voice without having to hold it in so hard. Aunt May needed it more because she had been empty and lonely for a long time, and Carl, on the other hand, knows the taste from the marrow and cannot bear it at all. During this period, Carl has been using the perfect super ability training box to train super ability. At the same time, he also recalled the location where Tony Stark was kidnapped in the Middle East. After only having an approximate location, he dispatched 200 black shadow ninjas in the desert. Looking for Tony Stark, because of the characteristics of the shadow ninjas, they could see outside even in the shadow world, so they searched very quickly, but it took them nearly 30 days to find Tony Stark's location. After Carl knew the news, he asked Gigi to make a camera and encrypt the signal, and let the dark ninja take it to the place where Tony Stark was imprisoned to take pictures, while Carl was sitting on the sofa watching the footage on his mobile phone. Just happened to see Tony Stark forging iron. The reason why Speedy made the camera was because he was afraid that someone else would find Tony Stark through the signal source. If he was found now, if something happened and he died or didn't become Iron Man, then where would he go to get Iron Man? Don't mention that Carl was coveting Tony's armor when watching movies in his previous life. Now that Marvel is here, you have to get yourself a few Mark series to collect. Although the extremely fast one can be made, he is only a combat-type Autobot after all. You want him to do research and make armors. Aren't you embarrassing him? Not to mention that only those made by Tony have collectible value, which just makes my dream come true. The signals encrypted by the Speed will not be detected, and even if they are detected, they will not be able to decipher it, let alone the text data of the Cybertron used by the Speed. If it is really deciphered, then Carl will find it strange, and even the Speed uses a virtual bank. Naturally, people noticed that the account purchased a large amount of Stark Industries stock. However, they could not find the account holder and specific information, which left many organizations in vain and helpless. Even S.H.I.E.L.D. went on to conduct a test, but in the end they could not detect anything, so they had to go to the Middle East to find it themselves. Tony Stark. Carl watched Tony wielding a sledgehammer in the cave, which was much more interesting than the movie. There were many reasons why Carl did not save him now, and a large part of them was because he was not sure about the attitude of the Ancient One, not to mention that the Ancient One has not yet he didn't come to the door. Tony Stark was the one who snapped his fingers in the end, and the Ancient One naturally knew that he had the time gem. So if he killed Iron Man, would the Ancient One kill him? Coupled with many reasons, Carl did not plan to save him now, but planned to save him when he was wearing it, and saved Yingsen by the way. It was definitely not because of Yingsen's personal charm that he saved him, but mainly because he wanted to save him. Let Tony owe another favor, and he still has fairy beans in his hand, plus Tony will be poisoned, and there are new elements in the city model, Tony is definitely owed these favors. Carl smiled a little unkindly when he thought of this. With these favors, Tony would probably have his own share of the steel battle suit in the future. Carl was greedy when he thought of his Mark 50 nano battle suit. After all, mechas are the only it's a man's romance. Carl, why are you smiling so pervertedly? Aunt May looked at Carl in confusion, then walked over to him and sat down. Ahem, it's nothing, I'm watching Tony Stark blacksmithing, look. Carl coughed awkwardly, then explained to Aunt May, and then handed her the phone in his hand to look at. Oh my god, this is Tony Stark. Wasn't he kidnapped? You couldn't have kidnapped him, right? Aunt May looked at the picture on her phone in surprise. After all, Tony Stark's disappearance was big news, reported almost everywhere. The reason why Aunt May said this was because she knew that Carl had this ability, and she also knew that Carl had the Black Shadow Ninja. Carl also explained to her that the Black Shadow Ninja is not a life, but is composed of energy bodies. She even knew about the existence of Speed. How is it possible? He was kidnapped by his uncle Obadiah Stane. In fact, at first he said he wanted to kill Tony Stark directly, but the terrorists didn't know it was Tony Stark they wanted to kill at the beginning. Then they asked him to make Jericho missiles for them. Carl held Aunt May's hand and explained to her, dumbfounded. So that's it, then why did his uncle do this? After hearing Carl's explanation, Aunt May leaned on his chest and asked doubtfully. It's definitely for Stark Industries. He is going to annex Tony Stark's shares and then control Stark Industries. Carl said slowly after kissing Aunt May on the forehead. Okay, then aren't you going to save him? I heard Jisoo say that you bought a lot of shares in Stark Industries. If Tony Stark doesn't come back, won't everything be in vain? Aunt May raised her head and looked. Said looking into Carl's blue eyes. I will save him, but not now, in a month. Carl touched Aunt May's hair and said to her gently. As long as you make your decision, please pay attention to safety. I will wait for you at home. I don't want to lose you, so promise me, okay? Aunt May said to Carl affectionately. Okay, don't worry, I'll be fine. Well, ... Time is passing quickly. Carl was observing Tony Stark's battlesuit manufacturing progress and training super ability every day, while Aunt May couldn't help but find something to do for herself. Although Carl said that he could raise her, she refused. Determined to find something to do, Carl had no choice but to let her go, just letting Speedy stay with her and protect her. After all, now that HYDRA knows about his existence, it is very likely that they will threaten him with the people around him. Although he has not felt any surveillance these days, not even the Black Shadow Ninja, Carl is sure that they will take action, or it was because of Nick Fury's cleaning up of S.H.I.E.L.D. HYDRA that they were quiet for a while. Either he couldn't pull it out, or based on his understanding of HYDRA, the Winter Soldier should have arrived by now. Chapter 21 Rescue Wanda and Pilot. Advertise here. Chapter 21. Rescue Wanda and Pilot. Carl looked at the picture of Tony forging iron on his phone, and suddenly saw the disassembled missile next to him, with the logo of Stark Industries printed on it. Carl suddenly thought of something. He remembered that the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver behind seemed to be in Sokovia because they were attacked, and then a Stark Industries missile fell in front of them. The two 10-year-old children hid under the table shivering, but the missile did not explode. Carl had a different view. He remembered seeing on a forum in his previous life that Wanda Django Maximoff and Peter Maximoff were both the children of Magneto. In the previous movie world, there was no mutant. So could this world with mutants be real? And as Stark Industries is a leading arms company, will the missiles they manufacture not explode? What an international joke. Carl thought it was probably because Wanda was emotionally excited that she triggered the origin magic power, and then modified the detonation of the missile. After all, the origin magic power is not ordinary. According to the timeline in the movie, Tony shut down the weapons manufacturing department after he came back. Although Obadiah was still selling, he was killed by Tony later. After that, Stark Industries no longer manufactured weapons, which means that now the timeline is almost when Wanda and Pilot encountered a terrorist attack, and it was when Stark Industries missiles fell in front of them. Carl wanted to hit here and said to Speedy immediately, "Jesu, now check if Sokovia is experiencing a terrorist attack, and immediately find out the locations of Wanda Django Maximov and Peter Maximov through the camera." Carl pressed the Bluetooth on his ear and spoke to Jisoo said, and now Jisoo is not with Carl, but is driving Aunt May to the bookstore. "Yes, boss, Sokovia is indeed suffering from a terrorist attack now, and the last surveillance screen of the two people you asked me to find showed that they were in their own homes, but they had been turned into ruins. It was even discovered through the surrounding surveillance that 3 days ago a Stark Industries missile fell inside, so I'm not sure if they're still alive." After a while, Speedy informed Carl of the information he had queried via Bluetooth. After hearing this, Carl stood up directly and called up the direction of Sokovia, and then the Shadow Ninja appeared next to him, and then took him to the Shadow World. He planned to save Wanda and Pilot, and origin magic power and the speed of the power is enough for him to move, not to mention the origin magic power from Sithorn, alter reality and all other abilities. Even in the video she watched in her previous life, Wanda once changed the universe with one sentence in another universe. She once said, "There is no more super ability in the world." Then all the super abilities in the entire universe disappeared, and even the magic of the Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One in Kamtaj disappeared. She even traveled through the timeline as if it was for her own child. So she is worthy of Carl's action. As for Pilot, although he was very defeated in the Women's Federation, Carl always felt that he died because of lack of funds. After all, everything would slow down when he was in extreme speed, and he was shot to death by a bullet in the end. It was simply unbelievable. Carl seriously suspected that there was not enough money to burn it, and then the director asked Pilot to finish it. No matter what, it is also the power of extreme speed, plus Wanda's origin magic power, which is enough for Carl to make a trip. Then after Carl enters the world of Shadow, the Shadow Ninja takes him to fly in the direction of Sokovia that Carl previously called. Sokovia. Wanda, don't be afraid, you'll be fine soon. Pietro hugged Wanda and hid under the table. Although he was also scared, he still comforted Wanda, while Wanda huddled up and shivered. After all, they were only at the age of 11 or 12, Wanda saw the missile that landed in the living room through the gap in Pilot's clothes, with the Stark Industries logo printed on it. There was a trace of hatred in his eyes, and the same was true for Pilot. They were all minors when they joined the Women's Federation. The two of them hugged each other tremblingly, trapped under the ruins, and had not eaten or drank for 3 days, so their bodies were naturally extremely weak. On the other hand, Carl was rushing from the world of Shadow to Sokovia quickly. After all, the Black Shadow Ninja does not know which city is Sokovia, so as long as it encounters a city in the direction that Carl pointed to before, he will take Carl out. After Carl is sure that it is not the city, he enters the Black Shadow world again. It wasn't until the 10th time that Carl looked at the location on his phone and saw that it was Sokovia. He called up the location of Wanda and Pilot's house that had been sent to him quickly before, and then immediately rushed there. He arrived in a short while. They saw ruins, and a Stark Industries missile was inserted in the middle of the house. But Carl did not see Wanda and Pilot. He immediately asked the Shadow Ninjas to move the wreckage of the house. 300 Shadow Ninjas worked together and soon moved the wreckage of the house. Carl was also at a table. I saw the unconscious Wanda and Pilot below, and asked the Shadow Ninja to pick them up and take them into the Shadow World and fly to Queens, New York. At the same time, I asked G-Speed to check the surrounding surveillance aside and put them away. All data is cleared, and called Aunt May back. Aunt May went to the bookstore to buy some extracurricular reading materials for Peter. After all, she felt that it was not good for Peter to play games every day after school. When Carl returned home, Aunt May was already at home. She saw Carl. The dark ninja behind him was holding 2 children. OMG. Carl, where did these children come from? Why are they like this? Aunt May looked at Wanda and Pilot in surprise. After all, they were both injured now and had several marks on their bodies. Below, some powder from the remains of the house fell on them, leaving the 2 of them covered in disgrace. I brought them back from Sokovia. There was a terrorist attack there, and their parents are probably. Aunt May, please take care of her first. Her name is Wanda. After Carl finished speaking, he motioned to the Shadow Ninja. When Wanda was handed over to Aunt May, why Wanda was alone? It must be because of Carl's psychology. How could this kid Pietro let Aunt May take care of him? Oh, that's it. What a poor child. Okay. Aunt May heard that Carl said that she had been attacked by a terrorist attack, and even her parents had. Then she picked up Wanda and carried her back to her room. That is, Carl in her room. Carl directly asked the Black Shadow Ninja to put Pilot on the sofa, and immediately asked the Black Shadow Ninja to get the medical kit. Then he applied some medicine to Pilot's injured area, and then asked the Black Shadow Ninja to wipe his body. Aunt May applied medicine to Wanda's wounds and wiped her body. After changing into her own clothes, she came down and cooked some porridge for them, because they had not eaten for a long time and could not eat in large quantities directly. And Carl went to the hospital to buy some glucose syrup, mixed it into the grated porridge and gave it to them to drink. Chapter 22 Wanda and Pilot wake up. Advertise here. Chapter 22. Wanda and Pilot wake up. After Carl rescued Wanda and Pilot, they didn't wake up until Peter was out of school in the afternoon. Wanda slowly opened her eyes in Carl and Aunt May's room and found that she was no longer in the ruins. Then she did not see Pilot's figure. She immediately got up and walked out of the door barefoot, even more. Going down the stairs, I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw Pilot on the sofa. Are you awake? Aunt May asked as she came out of the kitchen and saw Wanda on the stairs. Yes, did you save us? Where is this place? Wanda replied nervously after seeing Aunt May. Then she and Pilot were no longer in their original home. They should have been killed by someone. Saved, so I asked. No, it was Carl who saved you. This is Queens, New York. Are you feeling unwell now? Aunt May slowly walked up to Wanda and spoke to her gently. Carl, is it? No, I'm fine, thank you. Isn't our home in Sokovia? How did we end up in Queens, New York? Wanda was a little confused after hearing Aunt May's answer. After all, although she is old small, but I also know how far it is from Sokovia to New York. Haha, Carl is my lover. As for why you came to New York from Sokovia, it was Carl who brought you here. As for how you came, I can't tell you without Carl's consent. Just be fine. You should be hungry. I only fed you some grated porridge. Aunt May looked at Wanda and said with a smile, and there was even a hint of pride in her tone when talking about Carl. Where is this? Wanda. While Aunt May was talking to Wanda, Pilot woke up on the sofa, and immediately thought of his sister, shouting in panic, and Aunt May and Wanda were naturally noticed by Pilot's voice. I'm here. Pilot, can you stop yelling? We are not at home. Wanda glanced at Aunt May awkwardly, then accused Pilot, but there was still a flash in her eyes. A hint of warmth. Oh, Wanda, you are here, I thought. I'm sorry, madam, thank you for saving us. Pietro followed Wanda's voice and happened to see Wanda and Aunt May standing together. They also thought about Wanda's words just now, knew that they were rude, and immediately apologized to Aunt May. It doesn't matter. Now that you're awake, come over and have something to eat. I didn't save you, it was Carl who saved you. He doesn't know where he went now. He should be back soon. Aunt May smiled. He said to Pietro, and then invited the two of them to the dining table, while he went to the kitchen to take out apple pie, sandwiches, and other food. Thank you, I'm really a little hungry. Pietro walked to the dining table and sat down and said to Aunt May. The other side. Carl is now on his farm. Because he is developing the ability of frozen fruits, he can even condense a bunch of wings made of ice behind him at this moment, and can even take himself to fly. However, he does not directly fly into the sky, but just hovering around that area of the farm, and his current development of frozen fruits has far surpassed the period when he was killing gangsters, and now he can freeze with just one thought. Because although he has not fully activated the freezing ability, he estimates that it should not take 3 seconds to freeze the entire farm. Now he is working hard to continuously reduce the temperature of the ice, striving to develop it to the level of absolute zero, and absolute zero is 273.15 degrees Celsius. At this temperature of absolute zero, the molecules of any object have no kinetic energy and potential energy, and the potential energy is zero. Therefore, the energy of the object at the moment is zero. The temperature of the substance depends on the kinetic energy of the atoms, molecules and other particles within it. At the temperature of absolute zero, all molecules and atoms that make up matter stop moving. During the movement, all space, machinery, molecules, vibrations, etc. will move. In addition, at absolute zero, any energy should disappear. Carl estimated that if he wanted to reach this level, he would have to awaken the frozen fruit. However, it seems that there is no such thing as awakening for natural fruits. Or is it because a method has not been found, or are natural fruits already in the awakening state? Carl thought for a while and then stopped thinking about it. Whatever, just work hard to develop it and it will be done. After watching that the time was almost up, Carl dissipated all the surrounding ice, then sent out the shadow ninjas to tidy up the farm, and then drove the black Lamborghini towards New York City. Aunt May was chatting with Wanda, while Pilot was playing games with Peter. The main reason was that Wanda was more curious about Carl. After all, it was not close to New York from Sokovia. She was really curious about how Carl brought them here. Here, during the chat, she also learned that she had only been unconscious for a few hours. Boom 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 boom. Let's go, he's back. Aunt May said to Wanda with a smile, then got up and walked to the door. What? Who's back? Wanda was still a little confused, but she followed Aunt May's footsteps. The two of them came to the door together, and happened to see a black sports car entering the block from the street and parked directly next to it. On the open ground. Wanda looked at this sports car curiously. She had never seen it before. The next moment, the car door opened and a man nearly 1.9 meters tall stepped out from the driver's seat. He was wearing a platinum silk shirt, black pants and black leather shoes. He even had a handsome face, exuding a mysterious temperament, and with his blue pupils, he looks particularly charming. The man walked in her direction, and then she saw Aunt May walking in that direction, hugging and kissing the handsome man. She was surprised. She covered her mouth. After all, although Aunt May still had charm, she could tell that she was not young, and that handsome man must be much younger than her. Unexpectedly, Wanda, let me introduce you to him. He is Carl, the man who rescued you and Pilot. While Wanda was in a daze, Aunt May had already walked to Wanda with Carl on her arm and introduced him to Wanda. Ah, oh. Thank you for saving me and Pilot, thank you. After Wanda came back to her senses, she immediately thanked Carl, and then bowed deeply to him. Chapter 23 Adoption of Wanda and Pilot. Advertise here. Chapter 23. Adopting Wanda and Pilot. Okay, go in first, don't stand at the door. Carl said gently to Wanda, and then led Wanda and Aunt May into the room. Okay, what are your brother and sister's plans next? Sokovia is now in a raging war, and when I rescued you, I found 2 bodies, ahem. After entering the living room, Wanda will go to Pilot upstairs. He shouted, and when Pilot came down and found out that Carl was the one who saved him and his sister, he also thanked and bowed. We don't know either. Wanda and Pilot lowered their heads sadly. They naturally understood the meaning of Carl's last sentence. Although they had already guessed it, it was still sad to hear it. And Wanda's tears began to fall, and Pilot's eyes also turned red. Okay Wanda, it's okay. I'm here. How about we don't cry? Let him let go of the past. Aunt May glared at Carl, held Wanda in her arms and comforted, while Carl shrugged helplessly. They will know sooner or later, it is better to know now. Well, if you don't mind it, you can stay here and leave when you have plans, or I can adopt you, because it would be good to find a companion for Peter. Carl said casually, leaning on the sofa, as if don't care at all whether they stay or go. But Carl naturally cared about it, otherwise why would he save them? But he couldn't show his eagerness to adopt them. Wouldn't it appear that he had ulterior motives? So he made an excuse and pretended to be one for Peter. Besides, he also had this idea. You must know that in the timeline, before Peter became Spider-Man, he had a very low self-esteem. Now that Carl is here, how can he still develop such a low self-esteem character? So finding a companion for Peter is not an excuse, just a plan. Thank you, we can help you with housework and work. We don't have much to eat. Thank you very much. We are willing to be adopted by you. Pietro agreed directly before Wanda said anything, which made Carl a little bit surprised. Of course, it wasn't because of being hot-headed that Pilot agreed immediately. The reason why he went to chat with Peter was because he wanted to know what kind of person he was, and he didn't know whether the other person was a bad guy or a good guy, so he ran over to Peter. Peter was making insidious inquiries here, and Peter was unprepared. He just said whatever Peter asked, including that Carl saved them in the first place and that Carl had a sports car, etc. A series of things were revealed. From these things, Pietro briefly analyzed that Carl was a rich man who was kind to his own people, and then he breathed a sigh of relief, because if he was rescued by a bad guy, he would not end up well. Originally, Sokovia and other areas, there are many people and organ traffickers. Now that he heard that Carl could adopt them, he immediately agreed. After all, not to mention that he and his sister had no place to go in New York. Naturally, he didn't want to take his sister to live on the streets, and he learned from Peter that Carl was very generous and very wealthy. Chian is still willing to adopt himself and his sister. Even if he doesn't think about it for himself, he still has to think about it for his sister. He definitely wants Wanda to have a good life, so he answers before Wanda does. And he was quite clever and directly said that he could help with the work, and he didn't have much to eat. Will Carl be short of his little food? Pilot did this to arouse Carl's sympathy, which also showed that he was very clever. That's not necessary, I don't lack your food, Carl said to Pilot with a slight smile. Thank you for adopting me and Wanda. Pietro smiled innocently and bowed to Carl. Thank you. Wanda also walked out of Aunt May's arms and thanked Carl. Since Pietro had already said it and Carl agreed, she naturally had nothing to say. Okay, it's getting late now. Let's pack up and go to bed. I'll take you to buy clothes tomorrow. Carl smiled at Wanda and Pilot, and then took Aunt May to the room on the second floor. After Aunt May and Carl sat on the bed, Aunt May kept looking at Carl, as if she wanted to see through him. What's wrong, Aunt May? Tell me, were you planning to adopt them a long time ago, so you went to Sokovia to rescue them? Yes, because they are not ordinary people. Both of them have super abilities, and Wanda's ability is very powerful, and their parents have indeed died, so I plan to adopt them from the beginning. Carl looked at Aunt May's, his eyes directly expressed his previous thoughts. Huh, let me tell you, why did you suddenly run to Sokovia, and why do you like to call me Aunt May so much? Aunt May looked at Carl with a serious expression, and asked the question she had wanted to ask for a long time. After all, Carl had been calling her Aunt May since he was with her, which made her feel weird. I like it, it's a special tone. Carl looked at Aunt May with a wicked smile. Well, no, there's someone in the next room. But Carl didn't care so much. Aunt May could only grit her teeth helplessly again and cover her mouth with both hands. Dot 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 dot. The next day Carl took Wanda and Pilot to complete the adoption procedures. After that, he drove the two of them to buy clothes and daily necessities in a Lamborghini. While Wanda and Pilot were choosing clothes, Carl walked into the haute couture dress shop next door and had it customized in Aunt May's size. A dress, ready to be given as a gift to Aunt May. Afterwards, she took Wanda and Pilot back home, and Wanda looked at Pilot with an angry face because he also bought a game console. Although Carl didn't think anything of it, after all, it didn't cost much money, Wanda felt that she shouldn't buy these things since she was adopted. And Pietro said that Carl agreed, I want it. Carl smiled and ignored them. Instead, he walked up to Aunt May with the gift box and handed the gift box to her. It's for you, let's see if it fits. Carl said gently to Aunt May. Today is not a special day, is it? Aunt May looked at Carl suspiciously and said, a little confused as to why Carl suddenly gave her something. Every day with you is special, go and try it. Carl leaned into Aunt May's ear and said to her. Humph, okay, I'll give it a try. Aunt May walked to the room upstairs with blushing cheeks, and Carl followed behind, both of them ignoring Wanda and Pilot. 5 minutes later, Carl looked at Aunt May, who was wearing a dark purple dress. She had a slender waist, long legs, fair skin, and brown hair tied loosely behind her head. She was standing at the door of the room, like a rose in the mist and rain. It's as beautiful as a painting. It looks so beautiful on you, Aunt May. Carl walked up and hugged Aunt May's waist, and Aunt May also smiled happily when she heard Carl's compliment, and couldn't help but kiss him. Chapter 24 Rescue Tony Stark. Advertise here. Chapter 24. Rescue Tony Stark. Time flies, 20 days passed in the blink of an eye. Wanda and Pilot have integrated into them, and were later sent to school by Carl. But for some reason, Wanda was particularly attached to Carl, while Pilot liked to play with Peter. Carl didn't think much about it and used super ability every day. The training box is training super abilities, developing frozen fruits, and checking Tony's progress in making the armor. After that, he spent time with Aunt May every day, but Carl found that Aunt May was a little depressed recently. Carl found out through the world of shadows that it was because she felt that she was older than Carl and seemed a little unworthy of such an outstanding Carl. Even if Carl is left outside, he will be snapped up by women. After all, he is tall and handsome, and he has an extremely attractive and mysterious temperament. He is also rich, and he even drives a sports car at a young age. Not to mention that after Tony Stark returned, the Stark Industries stock purchased by Carl skyrocketed. His 200 million assets can instantly turn into 2 billion assets, or even more. So Carl can be said to be a very rich, handsome man, and it is not surprising that Aunt May would think so. After Carl found out, he didn't say much. He just planned to get a super gene for Aunt May to use, but it had to have no side effects. Kind of. After that, Carl got along with Aunt May as usual, without telling her his plans. Moreover, as time passed little by little, after Carl saw that Tony Stark was getting ready to put on the battle suit, two black figures appeared behind him. Ninja took Carl into the shadow world and flew in the direction of Tony Stark. Yingson, hurry up, wear the armor now, only in this way can we have a chance to escape. They are coming, Tony said anxiously to Yingson next to him, and then began to hammer out the armor one by one. Wear it on your body. Okay, what should we do now? Yingson helped Tony put the armor on him, and then asked him anxiously. Okay, now press function key 8. A progress bar will appear, do you see it? Tony adjusted the position of the armor and said to Yingson. After Yingson heard Tony's words, he pressed the computer's function key 8. Then a progress bar appears on the computer. Okay. The progress bar appears, Yingson said to Tony after heaving a sigh of relief. Okay, we just need to wait for the progress bar to clear up before we can escape. Tony said excitedly to Yingson. Boom. At this time, the robber who wanted to open the door was blown away by the bomb created by Tony, and the door also exploded. It's so powerful. Then definitely, it was me who did it after all. Tony, this won't work. They will come again soon. I'll help you buy some time, otherwise you won't be able to wait until the progress bar is completed. Yingson suddenly said to Tony, then walked to the door, picked up a rifle and fired it at Walk inside the passage. No, Yingson. No, it will be fine soon. Don't do this, Yingson. Tony wanted to stop Yingson in excitement, but he was wearing steel armor and the progress bar was not completed. He couldn't move at all and could only shout out to Yingson, and of course there is no return for Yingson. Tony, Yingson, they all know it. After all, Yingson is just one person. No matter how powerful he is, he can't kill all the terrorists. Tony looked at Yingson's retreating back. He no longer felt the joy of knowing that he could escape, but became extremely angry. Come on, I'm here. Yingson shouted all the way after leaving Tony's place, and fired at the terrorists in order to attract the terrorists' attention. And bought time for Tony, and Tony naturally heard it, and he closed his eyes in pain. Come on, I'm here. And Carl happened to have arrived outside the cave and saw what happened in the world of shadows. Carl looked at Yingson and smiled. Tony, you owe these two favors, and then prepare to wait. Yingson is found by Bald and saves him. Yingxin's shout was as he wished, and the bald man surrounded him with others. When Yingxin was about to accept his fate, a pair of black hands suddenly appeared under his feet, grabbing him and diving underneath. In fact, it was the world of shadows. Definitely it was Carl's masterpiece, and then two shadow ninjas grabbed his hands and brought him to Carl. Hello Yingxin. Carl smiled and greeted Yingxin. Who are you? Where are you? Wasn't I surrounded by them just now? Yingxin looked at Carl a little doubtfully. Although he didn't know who Carl was, he was not afraid of him harming him. After all, he was poor and white, and what if you really want to harm him, you don't even need to save him. My name is Carl. This is my shadow world. You can understand it is the backside of the world. Yes, I saved you. The reason why I saved you is for Tony Stark's favor. In fact, I mainly came to save him. Yes, Carl said to Yingxin with a smile, and directly told him his purpose. I see, but thank you anyway. ... The bald man on the other side looked at such a big person disappearing directly in front of him, and even felt that his eyes were dazzled, but when he heard the screams from his subordinates not far away, he didn't care so much. After all, he was a little more important than Tony Stark, so he led his men and ran in the direction of the sound. Boom, boom. Tony was wearing a simple battle suit and almost punched the terrorists one after another. The bullets hitting his battle suit had no effect at all. They could only leave a mark on it and could not hurt Tony inside the suit at all. And he was defeated steadily by Tony. Boom, boom. Ah, the bald man rushed to Tony's side with his men. He raised an RPG directly at Tony and pulled the trigger. However, after being noticed by Tony, he hid and fired a small homemade bomb at him. Boom, boom. Chapter 25 Return to New York. Advertise here. Chapter 25. Back to New York. Tony didn't aim, but just shot at the bald head based on his feeling. Although it missed a little, it knocked him to the ground. After that, Tony slowly walked out of the cave, and the terrorists outside the cave began to go crazy about Tony. Shooting. Even the heavy machine gun was aimed at Tony and started shooting wildly. Tony opened the flamethrowers on both sides of his arms and sprayed them at the terrorists below. After a while, most of the terrorists were defeated, but the remaining terrorists immediately stepped forward, and then the machine gun on his left a man walked over, pointed his gun at Tony, and fired. Even though Tony was wearing a steel battle suit, he was still suppressed by the firepower and knelt down on one knee. When Carl from the world of shadows saw this, he knew it was time for him to appear, and then a large number of shadow ninjas appeared from behind the terrorists from the world of shadows, and then inserted katana into their bodies. Carl also came out of the world of shadows, and even his eyes with a flash of blue light, all the surrounding terrorists were frozen. When Tony saw the gunshots suddenly stop, he looked up and saw a young man standing in front of him, looking around his battle suit. Hey, who are you? How did you deal with them? Are you a mutant? After Tony saw that all the terrorists around him were dead, he couldn't help but ask the young people surrounding his battle suit, because the scene he was the only one left, so of course he did it. Oh, my name is Carl, and I am here to save you. I have been looking for you for 2 months. No, I am not a mutant, and my ability does not come from genes. Do you want to come out now? It is safe here now. Carl, he said to Tony with a smile, while his eyes were looking at Tony's armor. As expected of Tony, he could knock out a piece of armor. Okay Carl, did you get the ability the day after tomorrow? Cool, I actually feel the cold in this desert. No, I have to destroy these weapons. Tony replied looking at the young man in front of him, but he knew that the other person was here to save him. He was also relieved. If he was also a terrorist, he probably wouldn't be able to escape. Although he didn't see Carl's move just now, the fact that there were corpses of terrorists around him undoubtedly didn't mean that Carl was very strong. Oh, okay, you go ahead and blow it up. I can fly, so don't worry about blowing it up. Carl also knew what Tony was thinking, so he asked him to do it himself. After all, it doesn't matter if he is kidnapped by terrorists. The key is that the other party still uses the products made by his company. Weapons, and all of them have the name of Stark Industries printed on them, which is simply a naked irony. Okay, see if you can keep up with me. After Tony finished speaking, he fired a homemade bomb at the missile placed next to him. Boom, boom. After the launch, it flew directly into the sky, and the homemade bomb detonated all the missiles, and a pair of blue crystal wings appeared behind Carl, but they were made of ice. Then he followed Tony and flew upwards, not even slower than Tony. After flying to a high altitude, Tony's jet device failed and he fell into the desert. Carl watched Tony fall, and the favor came again. At the same time, he quickly followed up and created a slide made of ice. Appearing below Tony, Tony just happened to be wearing a battle suit and fell on it, and then slid forward. Calfee created the slide in front, and Tony skated behind. Finally landing safely, Carl didn't think about grabbing Tony and flying him down. But Tony weighed at least 800 or 900 pounds, and with the impact of the fall, he might not be able to catch him, and he might even be able to catch him. Being brought down by Tony, Carl was still being strengthened by the black shadow energy, but he was not yet able to lift something weighing nearly 4 to 5 tons. Woohoo! Exciting. Good boy, it's okay. I thought I was going to fall, but you saved me again. Tony said to Carl excitedly, his face full of excitement. You owe me 3 favors now, Tony. Carl said to Tony with a smile after dispersing the frozen slide. OFK, it's obviously 2. Where are there 3? Tony said loudly to Carl. Are you sure? Who do you think that is? Carl looked at Tony with a non-smile and pointed behind him. Behind Tony, 2 shadow ninjas came out of the shadow world with Yingson. Who is it? My law. Yingson, you are okay. Oh, buy it. Tony turned his head disapprovingly and saw a familiar figure, and immediately exclaimed, because Yingson was the one who saved his life, even to give him time to lure away the terrorists. Hey, Tony, it was Carl who saved me, so I'm fine. Yingson also looked at Tony with a smile on his face, and then the 2 hugged. Okay, Frozen Boy, 3. And where did you hide Yingson just now? There is obviously no one here. Tony said helplessly to Carl, but his unwillingness to admit defeat immediately teased Carl as a freeze boy. I put Yingson in the shadow world, which is the other side of the world. Carl ignored Tony's teasing, but rolled his eyes at him, and then explained, and Tony's poisonous tongue made Carl laugh while watching the movie. I feel it deeply. Oh, okay, how do we leave now? Although Tony was a little curious, he didn't ask directly, but asked how we leave now. It depends on where you want to go. The nearest military base is New York or your own home in Marbury, California. Carl raised his eyebrows and said to Tony casually. Can you take me back to my own home now? How come? Where's the car? In the plane. Are you going to take us back directly? Tony looked at Carl suspiciously and said, after all, Carl came alone. Yes, even if you have a car or a plane, you still have to park at the airport. No, just tell me where you want to go. Carl said to Tony calmly. Go to New York. Yingson, please go back with me. If you return to your hometown now, you can't change the situation. You can only do it with me. Besides, I am also the chairman of Stark Industries. Tony and Carl said after that, he persuaded Yingson that Tony already regarded Yingson as his friend. He didn't want Yingson to return to his hometown, and there was still war there. If Yingson went back, it would be very bad. That's good. After hearing what Tony said, Yingson thought for a moment and agreed. Tony was right. Even if he went back, he would only rely on his own medical skills to save some injured people. It was different with Tony. He is also the president of Stark Industries after all, and he can definitely do more than what he could do back home. After Tony saw Yingson agreeing, he looked at Carl, and Carl smiled mysteriously. Then 2 shadow ninjas appeared behind Yingson and Tony, taking them into the world of shadows, and one also appeared behind Carl, and Tony entered the world of shadows. Then he immediately looked around, but there was only darkness all around, even a little scary.